To order this meeting of the City of Bloomington Plan Commission for April 10th, 2023. Start by giving just a quick overview of the agenda tonight. We have one petition that was tabled to a future meeting. That's SP 2422, Cutters Kirkwood 123 LLC. That's the property at 115 East Kirkwood Avenue, so that will not be heard this evening. We do have a consent agenda with one petition. That's SP 0922, the Bloomington Redevelopment Commission, property at 617 North Madison Street. And then three petitions to be heard tonight, PUD DP 2421. This is Petitioner Robert V. Shaw, property at North Prow Road, 3500 block of North Hackberry Street. We then have SP 0923, Core SVA Bloomington, Plato 2 LLC, property at 2038 North Walnut Street. And then finally, ZO 1223, amendments to UDO Chapter 3, use regulations related to chicken flocks, and Chapter 4, development standards and incentives, amendments there as well. So we will get to all of that shortly, but let's start by calling the roll.
Ballard?
Here.
Morrell?
Here.
Seabour?
Here.
Cockrum? He will be a few minutes late. Sorry about that. Kinsey?
Here.
Korodke?
Here.
Smith?
Here.
St. John?
Here.
Whistler?
Here. All right. So we do have a quorum, so we will proceed. Before we get to those petitions, we do have a couple things, a little bit of housekeeping to take care of. First, we do have minutes to be approved from the March 6th, 2023 meeting. Are there any corrections or questions to those minutes? No? Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
Motion to approve the March minutes.
Can we have a second? All right, we have a motion and a second. Would you please call the roll on the approval of the minutes?
Ballard? Yes. Burrell? Yes. Seabour?
Yes.
Kinsey?
Yes.
Korodke?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
St. John?
Yes.
Whistler?
Yes.
Thank you.
Those minutes are approved. We'll move on now to reports, resolutions, and communications. Are there any reports or resolutions or communications from staff this evening?
No, I don't believe we have any reports tonight. Thanks.
All right. Any reports from commissioners? Go ahead.
I have a report from my participation in the Bloomington-Monroe County Metropolitan Planning Organization. And I think that, we were trying to model good practice by offering any input or information from those meetings when we are charged with participating in them. And I just want to offer one thing from that meeting. These meetings are held about monthly, so they're on a Friday afternoon. And this meeting, the most recent meeting, actually for March, was actually quite interesting because there was a great deal of discussion around some state funds that were going to support some enhancement projects on State Route 45. And what struck me about this, these particular developments is how much I'll just frame it as perhaps misunderstanding, or people aren't aware necessarily that 3rd Street is a state route, therefore it is funded through state transportation funds, and it's not something that the city controls or the county controls. It's really a state-funded project, and it was surprising to me that not only, I won't necessarily suggest that members of the committee didn't understand that, but there's definitely a lack of awareness over who controls what. And I think some of the developments that the state is proposing to invest in at the intersection of 3rd and 45 and basically 3rd Street is really quite interesting and something that I think will help us with some of the traffic congestion and other issues that are have been of concern as we continue to develop along 3rd Street. So just something to look out for, but it really is governed by state transportation funds and INDOT investments. That's it for me.
Thank you. Any other reports or communications from commissioners? Yes, Commissioner St. John.
I just have a comment building on Commissioner Kinsey's theme of clarification. I've seen in a couple campaign pieces by a mayoral candidate, and then I've heard from some other folks that there might be an assumption that if someone is appointed by the mayor on this plan commission, which I am one of those, along with other folks here, not everyone, of course, that somehow then the mayor tells us how to vote and controls how we vote and those kinds of things. And I just want to state that I've never been asked by the mayor's office how to vote. In fact, when I got the request to be on this commission, I first said no, because I didn't want to invest the volunteer time. And that's the other part where, a lot of us are volunteers. But I decided not to be so rash and kind of look into it and asked that question if I would ever be pressured by the mayor's office how to vote. And they said, and I was told no. And I said, great, because I'm out when that happens. I'm not interested in that. So for the time I've been on this, and I really don't remember how long, it's not as long as some people here, I've never been asked or told how to vote by the mayor's office. I mean, it's a process. Plan commission, granted, ultimately reports to administration. Petitioners are here, members of the public are here, and it's a big process. So I personally, and I think a lot of my colleagues, vote on the merits of what we hear, and then it goes on to the next step in the process. So I did just want to clarify that for people who maybe have seen that in election material and think that to be true. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I would echo that. It is that time of year, so we see lots of communications about what goes on in City Hall. I think there is a lot of confusion about that, but I would certainly echo that. I don't think it's any secret that the mayor and I disagree on many things, and yet I am a mayoral appointment and have never been told how to vote. And like you said, it would be no reason to tell me because it would do no good. But I do hope that, that the members of the public understand that this is, we're all here appointed by different bodies and representing different particular appointing bodies, but we're all expected to be independent thinkers, and I think we all are. So appreciate that. Any other communications or reports from commissioners? All right. We will then move on to the consent agenda. For those of you who don't know, anybody who's curious about this, consent agenda is typically an agenda where there are petitions that are either already sort of meeting the precise letter of the law or otherwise really are non-controversial, and so we kind of consider those as a package. But we definitely have an opportunity to dig deeper into those. So there is one petition on the consent agenda. This is, as I mentioned, SP 0922, the Bloomington Redevelopment Commission. This is a request for an extension of the site plan granted under a previous case. Are there any commissioners who would like to see that removed from the consent agenda and receive a full hearing? No. Any questions or comments on the consent agenda? Any members of the public who would like to comment on the consent agenda? All right, seeing none. Back to the commission. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll motion to approve the consent agenda for SP 0922.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. I have one question on this, sorry, before we call the roll on that. Is this a property within the Trades District?
Yes.
All right.
It's the Trades District Technology Center.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
All right, so I'll abstain from this vote since I do have some economic interests in the trades district. But I think we can go ahead and call the roll.
Great, thank you. Motion is for approval of the consent agenda. Burrell?
Yes.
Seaboard?
Yes.
Cockrum?
Yes.
And just let the minutes reflect, Mr. Cockrum and Mr. Enright Randolph both joined during reports. Kinsey?
Yes.
Ko-Rodke?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
St. John?
Yes.
Whistler?
Abstain.
And Ballard?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to take a second here and see if I can get these screens on. Just a second.
Sure.
Well, there's one. Let's see. I'm going to try it one more time, and then we might just be at one.
For those watching at home, just bear with us a moment. We are dealing with some audio-visual difficulties.
Three or one?
Well, looks like we're at three.
Three's better than one.
Okay, sorry. Mic mute was on, so we've got three going. Hopefully, the other one will pop on. Sorry about that.
All right.
Okay.
Moving on, we will now move to our petitions for the evening. We will begin with PUD DP 24-21, petitioner Robert V. Shaw. I believe we've got Jackie Scanlon to present.
Great, thank you. Jackie Scanlon, Development Services Manager for Planning and Transportation. Let's see here. Oops. This petition has been seen by this body. This body saw the petition in December of 2022 and has been on the docket for some time. We've been working with Mr. Shaw since we first contacted the petitioner in 2020 with some enforcement issues to see about getting this project done. So we are looking at Section 5, the last section of the Ridgefield subdivision. The access is off Prow, or maybe it's Pro, I never say it right, road there on the north side of town. And this is just north of Bloomington High School North. So some of the property is developed. This section here that's squared out here is obviously the area that majority has not been developed yet. So there was an original PUD, just to go over set a little background, original PUD in 1994. Final plan approval and primary plat approval for this section was approved in 2008. And then I'm sorry, that was primary plat and final plan, and then the secondary plat for the lots that you can see here that are platted was done in 2009. So those houses have been being built since that time. So the petitioner, we are working with the petitioner to hopefully finish out this section here and be done. One of the issues is that there are some right-of-way improvements that need to be done. Because this is in a planned unit development, a grading permit cannot be pulled at this location unless there is an approved final plan. So we need to have a final plan approved so that we can go forward with the rest of permitting and have not only the area that hasn't been built, but have the area that is largely developed. There are some corrections and things that need to be made with areas in the right-of-way, such as some sidewalks. The petitioner is working with the engineering department on that now, but we need to be able to move that forward. And in order to do that, we need the final plan. So this is just over 8.5 acres. Again, one of our remaining older plan unit developments. The comprehensive plan designation is neighborhood residential. So you will recall from December that it's a two-part proposal for the final plan. They are requesting to amend where the approved tree preservation area is located so that they can have some larger lots to sell there along the southern portion. And also amending the landscape plan. We have asked them in December at the hearing, we asked that they submit an updated landscape plan because the approved landscape plan in some places could not be built. So we were asking that they give us an accurate plan of what is there and what can be done because Mr. Shaw, the developer, no longer owns a number of these lots because they have been built and sold off. So some of those lots, for example, showed buffer yards where those parties are, we don't know what's going on in those backyards. So having that be correct so that when it's time to do a final inspection, we will know what we're looking for. There is a detention lot shown here on one of the western lots that hasn't been fully installed. So that's another issue that we were addressing and amending some of the conditions. There was a condition, I believe, of one of the previous approvals related to no on-street parking. So removing that condition as it's not 1994 anymore. And so this type of development with road width would not be excluded from on-street parking now in kind of a modern design. So we do not need to exempt this neighborhood from being able to use on-street parking. And then the primary platting portion, again, is just to actually plat that unplatted area, and the petitioner requested to reduce and reconfigure those lots. So here, again, the area on the north end, on the top, yellow is already platted, and the area in the green is not. This is the detention lot that I mentioned. That is part of the original approval, that there will be detention done there, as well as detention landscaping. That has not been done. So we are calling that out because, as you can see, that's part of the already original platted area, but does need to be developed with this final plan. So this is the original landscape plan, as I mentioned. You can see like areas up here against the hospital and the other houses. The developer no longer owns those properties. So we didn't feel it was appropriate to hold these new owners to these requirements when they probably don't even know they exist. And so asked the petitioner to submit a plan that was actually more accurate or possible. And you can see this is the old tree preservation area here. So this is to the north of the high school. Fields are immediately to the south, and the petitioner is requesting to move that so that they can have deeper lots in this area. So again, these are the two phases of Section 5 that we're looking at. One of the things that came up was that the petitioner is requesting subdivision waiver to allow for this design. This is a design from from the late 90s, early 2000s. And it includes an eyebrow here, which is this little kind of island thing out in the right-of-way. You can see they have another one to the north here, and a cul-de-sac. Neither of those things are allowed by code now. So we discussed at the December hearing that something we had asked of the petitioner was to indicate why they couldn't meet those requirements. And Plan Commission had asked that as well. So then they worked on an alternative street design, and you can see that this is that. So this is a street with no cul-de-sac, no eyebrow. It has one shared driveway for 3 lots here, one entrance, and then the driveways break off. The petitioner is showing individual driveways for each of these paired homes, and also a couple of detached homes. Here in the southeast corner, we think that could be done a little bit differently with some shared drives instead of having 10 individual driveways. So these are the 2 areas in question that have changed. This was an exhibit put together by engineering staff just showing that it could be possible to make this work with 6 driveways instead of having 10 cuts, reducing the cuts slightly, which obviously improves impervious surface issues in this area as well. And then this was ongoing conversation with the designer and the engineering department. A number of these kind of bump outs to indicate on-street parking were proposed and discussed between the engineer and both the private engineer and the city engineering staff. And so that is included in one of the conditions as well, that if you are to choose this design as opposed to what is being proposed by the petitioner, that those bump outs would be included. We did get a new landscape plan. Again, not a landscape plan we are dictating. We have asked that the petitioner give us a realistic landscape plan in order for us to be able to review. So this would be showing, obviously, street trees were a concern, and street trees along the major road prow to the west as well. So in these areas, we do think that more delineation of landscape plan is necessary. They're not obviously showing any, you can kind of see the little indications of street trees along the new roads, but there are no specific indications along prow. And then there are still gaps in the existing area. So they're also missing opportunity for potential buffer yard here in the southeast. So we have a couple of landscape comments in the conditions as well. This is the area that is south of the southwest portion of the site. So as I said, the site abuts the fields immediately to the south that are part of Bloomington High School North. And in this area is where the petitioner would be proposing to plant more trees into the buffer, as some have gone missing. You can see here the fence line, gets very close to the property line here that the school has put in. Okay, so the outstanding issues from December, landscaping correction, as I said, they submitted a new plan. We think there are still some more changes to be made. That's part of the final plan. That's why we're discussing it here. Previous condition related to on-street parking, the road design waivers, and the tree preservation change. So we've been working with the petitioner for some time. We are actively getting a lot of complaints at this site, which we may have members of the public on the line today, I'm not sure, because as part of this project, there are a number of sidewalk issues that were identified, and those needed to be corrected. Before the petitioner submitted drawings to correct those, he just removed all of the sidewalk that wasn't meeting code. So it's just these people have been without large chunks of sidewalk now for a number of months while we've waited for design. We are in kind of a weird situation because this is such an old case and it's already in enforcement. That's why we're here now, because of the letter we sent in 2020. Being able to compel him to submit those plans, which we do have now, and then submit a bond will be easier, I think, for us once this is approved and we're going to get to the next step of grading permit, because we're in a little bit of a no person's land right now related to the enforcement, and it's making it difficult for the neighbors here. So we hope to have this resolved tonight, one way or the other. We understand that the original design did include the two road design details that are that were approved at that time. As I've said before, had this been built at that time, he could have built them and that would have been fine. They no longer meet kind of our expectations for typical and safer road design. And so we are asking that you don't approve the waivers, the waiver requests, and that they build the design to the design that they've shown as possible. So the department recommends that the Plan Commission approve the final plan and primary plat amendment for Section 5 of the Ridgefield subdivision while denying the subdivision waiver request. And then we had 11 conditions. So the first, again, this is the major one that would only apply if you do deny the waivers, is that the approved design for this primary plat is the one that is shown as the alternative roadway design with the bump outs shown in street design B. So to be clear, that would be the design without the cul-de-sac and without the eyebrow. Number two, that the petitioner shall submit an application for grading permit within 30 days for a minimum for the developed portion of Section 5. Number 3, the petitioner shall submit to the Engineering Department a public improvements bond estimate within 30 days of this approval, and will submit the required bond within 10 days of the approval of that estimate. Again, that's for work that's already platted, and they're already doing that work, and it should be bonded for. Number 4, the petitioner has agreed to instruct construction traffic to enter the site from the west. Signage to that effect, minimally one at the east end of the to-be-constructed Winter Street Drive, and one at the west end where Prow connects will be placed on the site during construction. Tracks 1 and 2 shall be corrected and shown as part of lots 13 and 14 on the secondary plat. The petitioner shall identify all common area lots around the paired homes on the secondary plat. The petitioner shall identify tree preservation areas and easement on the secondary plat with all required language included on said plat. And then number 8 is a list of some of those landscape plan corrections that I mentioned, including largely indicating that the required street trees be shown. Number 9, relabeling, sorry, Chris. Relabeling lot 43 as a detention pond as well as common area lot. 10, removing the pedestrian connection easement to the high school to the south. And then number 11, removing the previous conditions related to on-street parking for this section. And I can answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a representative of the petitioner who would like to present this evening? Please step to the podium and state your name.
My name is Brad Myrick. I'm with Bledsoe Riggert Cooper James.
Make sure your mic's on, Brad.
That's okay, because I couldn't hear you guys half the time, so I'll just talk louder. And with regards to all the items that you saw on the chart, we would definitely like to push forward with the project with the cul-de-sac and the eyebrow as it was designed originally to match the portion of the site that's already built, as well as, if required, we could make the cul-de-sac a private drive or street. Also, it was stated that along the eastern property, I believe it's where the duplexes and single-family homes are, that there needs to be additional trees, and after being at the site, we'd have to cut down trees to plant trees in that one specific area. There's a couple of other areas with respect to the landscaping that we're not objecting to any repair work, but there are images that I have just looked at recently on Google Earth on one of the areas that I wasn't able to access when I was at the site. And those trees are in place. And we showed them as clusters or canopy lines on the drawings. But in Google Earth, June of last year, they're there. The other item that I noticed while I was going through the notes, the detention area with the existing grass that's in place is functioning and has been approved, and it works fine. It's been adjusted to Mr. Peden's requirements with CBU. We really don't want to go out there and dig up existing grass or lawn to plant a mix of different seed, which at the time this was permitted and built and approved, the grass worked and was fine. So that's where my client, Mr. Shaw, wants to move forward as the eyebrow, the cul-de-sac, basically as it was, with modifications with the on-street parking. We've addressed a couple of issues that have been reviewed, which was the intersection midway through the site. We've pulled the crosswalks closer together per Mr. Neil Copper's recommendations, and we've addressed the on-street parking shape of the ends where people pull off, so they're 45 instead of just a blunt 90-degree turn, so it's more accessible. We've placed additional landscaping along the north property line of the Bloomington North High School. And that's where we are right now.
Thank you. Are there any questions from commissioners, either for staff or for the petitioner? Commissioner Kinsey.
Sure. I guess one of the questions I have for staff and perhaps the petitioner is the discrepancy about the trees. Can you say a little bit more about what's the discrepancy between the petitioner's, is it Brad, sorry, Bledsoe, is that correct? Bledsoe. Yep. What's the difference between the Google Maps point you were trying to make and what we're requesting here? I just want to make sure I fully understand what the discrepancy is.
Well, I don't know if I can approach you or not.
You might be able to use the camera, maybe if that's what you have an image.
Yeah, if you could give that to staff, they may be able to put that on the overhead projector.
Okay, and just as she gets ready to put that up, we're looking on the top of the area that's shaded, and actually up is east. So up the page is looking that way east.
East. Okay, yeah.
And we had shown on the original plans trees along that edge. And those trees are in place. And we had called out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you can see the fence line runs from left to right, which is from north to south, as you're looking east up the page. And those trees, you can tell they're kind of split. The ones that are farther up the sheet is on the other property. And then we have, well, it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then there's at least 4 in the cluster that would be farther south. So they may not be equally spaced, but it's planted in there. Now, I'm sure there's additional areas that we could look at, one of which is down by the multifamily homes, but we just showed that as what I call a cloud, because it was a wooded area. So, but that's the area of landscape that I was referring to, that was to the east of the existing area. I believe that was on one of the...
Hold on, I'm going to put up, so is this east of lots 10, 11, and 12? Which is these here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's those.
So that's fine. We aren't asking for any more trees in that area.
And that's the area we're going to have to cut trees to plant trees.
Where, here?
No,
he-
down.
Down here?
Yes.
Okay, yes. So the issue there is, that's fine. If there are trees there that they want to count as buffer and they want to call them out and mark them as preserving them, that's fine. Just indicating that there are some trees here on the final plan does nothing to indicate that they'll remain. So the landscape plan that we see doesn't have any indication on here that there is intention to keep those trees. And so that's why we're asking for it. On the original plan, which again, you know, was some time ago now, they proposed plantings in those locations.
Yeah.
So then on the new plan, they're not proposing it. So we're saying, hey, if that was appropriate at the time, knowing, you know, that that was going to back up to someone else's backyard, we think you should put that back in. If the petitioner is indicating that there's already trees there, that's fine. We would like for those trees to be called out specifically in the plan and that they're either be preserved or replaced.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Seabour.
Sure, I think a couple questions. Maybe just to start off, and I think this one I'll direct to staff to start, but just with the staff recommendation is essentially like an alternative design, and just wanting to understand what potentially approving a condition with an alternative design, how we can be approving a final plan that doesn't reflect the plan with the conditions. I'm struggling to make words.
Sure, yeah, so it's a two-part, and Mr. Rooker can correct me if I'm wrong, it's a two-part approval, right? It's final plan and primary plat. So we're suggesting to you, because this is kind of weird, or how I mentioned it earlier, it's a little bit of like a Frankenstein situation. Normally, we just see the plat and that's it. This, we've received so many iterations, and the petitioner does not want to do this iteration, so we don't know whether or not you're going to approve the waivers, so we did not compel them to give us, you know, a new clean version of this and say, but these are engineered plans prepared by the petitioner showing a design that we think is appropriate here. So this would be the design augmented by the bump outs that are in the next sheet that would be approved as the primary plat as well as the final plan. Then when it was time to do the secondary plat, this would be the base for what that secondary plat, which is the document that ends up getting recorded, would be. Does that answer your question?
That helps a lot. And I guess just with that, I assume there would be room for what I would maybe call more technical detail refinement with like landscaping for street tree placements. And then maybe one that caught my attention was like the road cross-section, like how thick the asphalt design is. There's some things that I think we would ideally like to see updated.
Yes, I think so. So we tried to catch those, right? So in the landscape condition, it indicates, you know, a number of street trees based on what the code requirement was when this was just recently filed. But yes, the cross sections, I think, and again, Mr. Rooker can correct me if I'm wrong, what we have said in the past is that if that isn't code compliant, that isn't being approved as part of the primary plat and will need to meet code when it's eventually done.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Cochran.
This is for staff. Could you just explain again what the developer is proposing on these paired patio homes? And then what is your suggestion, just so I have it clear? And then I may have a couple more questions, but.
Sure. So this is the proposal from the petitioner. The green portion is what doesn't exist yet. So road connection here, extending winter suite, ending in an eyebrow here to maximize the number of lots they can get in this corner, doing a cul-de-sac here, again, to maximize number of buildings here. So what Plan Commission asked them in December was, could they show a plan without the eyebrow and the cul-de-sac that had the same number of lots and or units here in this location, because this was a common area lot. And that's what this plan is. So you saw in your packet that one of the arguments the petitioner made was that this is more impervious surface. It's because of all of the 10 driveways. So that's why we proposed in the conditions that they would be limited to 6 driveways and that some of them would have to be shared. And then in that way, that would be less impervious for this development. So being that the cul-de-sac and the eyebrow are no longer allowed in the subdivision control, and actually I don't even think the eyebrow was allowed at the time this was originally approved, it was waived at that time. But that, we are trying to encourage compliance with the current code, and that had this been built at that time, of course, they would be able to build it to the standard that they prefer, but now that since they're coming back, they need to meet current code. So they're requesting a waiver to be able to build the other drawing. And we are requesting that you don't approve those waivers, and then they'll build this one.
And then there would be shared drives, correct?
Yes.
So then-
But something along the lines of this.
Gotcha.
We would just set it as a maximum of 6 driveways, and then they would figure out how they wanted to do that if they didn't want to do this.
So if we approved this, the plan that you're suggesting, I mean, things like maintenance agreement, management agreements, all with the shared drives, it'd be something for the developer to have to work out and represent to us, is that correct? Or is it
It
something
would
they
just be something for them to work out with the buyers.
just with the buyers, okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions from commissioners?
Just a quick question for the petitioner. In terms of this timeline, why has it taken this long? We've been told there's several reiterations of the plans dating far back. What has there been holdups economically, fiscally? Why is it taking so long?
I can't understand what he's saying. I'm going to tell him about that when I get up there. I'll explain.
Okay.
You can go ahead.
Yeah, you're welcome to approach the podium now and speak.
Hi, my name is Robert Shaw, for those of you who were here in December. And I told you a little bit about my history of building and subdividing. I've been doing it for 40-some years. My first development was Blue Slopes Drive in Blue Ridge. That was the first one I built, and some of the houses. And I built all over town, so I've been around. The reason why was in 2008, I bought this land up here, $475,000, and it was already part of a PUD. And so I went and had it engineered, and I didn't have time to do all the development work myself, so I hired Larry Stanger Excavating to come in at a cost of $550,000, and I thought I had it financed with Monroe Bank or People's State Bank, and I got started, and less than a week after I signed the contract, I got messages from both banks, wait a minute, we can't finance it. We're under the consent decree, and we can't do it. And so I had to take a line of credit to get the money to pay those bills to manage to get in what I got in. The other thing that happened was I didn't sell a single lot. The housing crash came in 2008, and it just wasn't anybody buying or building, and so I was sort of stuck. So every house up there, and I think there's 17 or something like that, I built it myself. I had to, because if I got them built, then I could sell them. So anyway, that's why. Now, does that answer your question?
Well, just wondering, wait until now. I mean, obviously, we understand, right, the economics of, but the boom of the last 5 years in the real estate market
Well,
has
we have
created
never
more demand than.
We have been working. There are reasons that are personal that I can't I can't divulge here. So
That's okay. You don't-
I'm trying to finish this up. I'm 76 years old, and I'd like to finish this up. And I'd like to satisfy planning, but there's a few things that I need to correct here. Since this is up here right now, can you imagine sharing a driveway with that many other people? Who's gonna sweep it? Who's gonna clean it? I mean, who's gonna pick up the dog turds? You know, what if you have a neighbor that you despise and you don't get along? Everybody, and that snake pit they put up there, the other picture, that is ridiculous. It's so much impervious surface. What I want to do is put that cul-de-sac in there, and I told you this in December. People like cul-de-sacs. Their kids play in them, and they are able to not worry about them getting run over, like right there. Now, I also told them, if you don't want to do it, I'll make it part of the condo association's responsibility to take care of that cul-de-sac. We'll have an association, and so I'm sure that we can add that to it, and they can take care of it themselves, and the city wouldn't have to worry about it. So, and the eyebrow down there, as I told you the last time, that was put in by the previous planning staff. They required it, and so we designed it that way, and there's 4 storm drains down there that's already installed, and it's all connected up and under the pavement going north from there. And if we have to start over with a different design there, that means ripping out $10,000, $15,000 worth of storm drains and try to redo it. I don't think it makes any sense. Now, that whole rest of that subdivision up there, the parts that are already built are full of cul-de-sacs, and nobody seems to complain about them. But if maintenance is a problem, like I said, we can make it part of the homeowners association. Now, moving on to the other things. Along Pro Road, would you put up leave this one here for a second, make sure I got it. If you see that dotted line around the bottom and east side where the green line is, you see a dotted line there? That is part of a tree preservation conservancy. And it says right on the buildable plans that that's what that is. And it's already forested. If I have to plant trees, we'll have to cut down trees to plant trees, and it just doesn't make any sense. So could we have the other drawing up with the green lines with the tree things? Yeah, right there. Okay, along the left side there, where you can see the long line along Pro Road, there were actually 3 or 4 small trees. We're talking 3 4-inch caliper at the north end of that line that were taken out when the sidewalks were put in because the roots were extended under the sidewalk, and as I was digging the sidewalks, it tore them up. And if you see, there's a very small area there, and that's a county road, by the way, that we could put we could plant 3 trees up there again, maybe, It'd have to be small because they're going to extend into the right-of-way. There were 2 trees at the entrance there that were big maples that were taken out, but they were taken out by the county because they obstructed the view to get into the road, and that road is very narrow, and those high school kids fly up and down that road, I can tell you. And down there from the road extension in the middle there, south, they've got that green line there, and there was nothing taken out there. There was not a single tree taken out by me down in that area there. All the original and their fence line trees, they got barbed wire in them. Along that road, they're still all right there. Now, the detention area there was built exactly as the plans showed in 2008. It has a series of sand under drain to filter out any pollutants. And we've maintained it, and I've mowed it for 15 years, we've mowed that area there, and the kids that live there play in that area. People walk their dog down there. If they retrofit and try to make me put that sawgrass in there after the fact, it doesn't do anybody any good. And I talked to Phil Peden, and he agreed that we could leave it the way it is. Only thing he asked me to do was to raise the flood level in the pond, the outlet, 6 inches, so that we would have the water in the pond for a longer period of time. So I don't want to mess that up because the people up there use it. And now, as I told you last time, this was a cow pasture. So when the cows were in there, they rubbed on the trees to scratch the flies off, and they walked on the roots of the trees. And all the trees that are up there, that were up there, a lot of them just died and fell down. There were, I think, there was a big not a hackberry, an Osage orange that the wind split that thing in half because it was like multiple shoots, and it split it in half, and I had to take it down. And there was a maple between lot 13 and 12, 13 and 12, a giant maple, but it was rotten, and it was unsafe. The one next to it fell down, and my guys, it fell during working hours, and they had just went through there, and the tree fell down, and so I said, we cannot risk this tree, and it was hollow and rotten, so we took it down. Excuse me. Now, the other changes that they made, up there at the top, they're showing a line with outlined by a small loopy red line there. All those trees up in there, I planted every one of them. The people that bought those homes in that whole area up there wanted to put up fences, and some of them did, damage trees or remove some things to get their fences in. But all those yards up there, that's why the staff couldn't get in there, because it's all fenced. What Brad did was showing you on Google Earth, there is vegetation up there, and I'm not trying to avoid anything. I'm just trying to get this done. And I'm willing to accommodate any reasonable request, but that line where those trees in that tree preservation area there, you'd have to cut down trees, put trees. It just doesn't make any sense. Now, let's see. I think I hit everything that I really wanted to. We did want to move the tree preservation area around a little bit and reconfigure it, which it doesn't show on this one, but on the other plan it shows it. And we did that so that the people would have more of a yard, and it would be more buildable area. But with this plan right here, we preserved exactly the same amount of real estate that the old plan had for tree preservation. You're not losing a thing. And the other thing that happened that wasn't mentioned here tonight was at the last commission meeting, y'all thought maybe we could get another entrance onto Pro Road from the county. They nixed that right off. They said no. So that couldn't happen. There where that eyebrow is. Mm-hmm. Any questions? Well, I hope. Oh, one other thing. In their packet, they say I have to have a bond within 30 days. It ain't happening. You can't get a bond in 30 days. I need 60 to 90 days to get a bond. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I don't have one in my pocket. And I can tell you, dealing with bankers to get that, it'll take time. They have their own requirements, and they have to go to their board meetings and get approvals for those things. I can get it, but I need at least 60 days, and I'd rather you give me 90, because I'm not going to, give me at least 60, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Would staff care to respond? I'd like to hear a little bit more about the two things in particular. One, what is the, why do we need the bond within 30 days? And then the second question I would have is just why, what's the justification for the change to the retention area that you're seeking?
Sure. Okay, so bond within 30 days, we're happy to have that be longer if that's more reasonable. And Mr. Seaborn may be able to speak to that better than I don't know. We just need to have a deadline. We've been operating kind of we have set deadlines that haven't been met. We just need to have a deadline, and we want it to be realistic. So if it needs to be 60 days, that's fine. Yeah, so typically when a bond is reviewed, right, they submit the amount to us and then to the city, and then the amount is approved or whatever, and then they seek it. We don't often change them by much, I would say, meaning like those conversations could start when you're submitting the estimate to us. That conversation could start, and then that amount could be tweaked. But we're happy to have that be more time.
And was that 30-day limit spelled out in one of the conditions?
It's in one of the conditions, yes. So they have 30 days to submit the grading permit, which I think we hope you'll stick with that. They have already tried to submit it before. We can't take it because they don't have a final plan. So it'll be based on these plans. But then we indicated also that the public improvements bond estimate, that they'll submit an estimate within 30 days and then submit the bond within 10 days of approval of the estimate. So that's kind of more of an engineering. I'm sure Andrew would be open to more time. I just think you should put a limit on it. I'm sorry, and then what was the second thing?
On the retention pond, what's the reason for the requested change there?
So the detention standards now, and for some time, and I think in 2008, but Eric could probably correct me if I'm wrong, require particular sorts of plugs or plants so that the detention pond functions better. It's not supposed to be, I know that they do use it for a recreational area there. I mean, that's what they said, when we met out on site, people walk their dogs there. Its function is supposed to be to help treat and slow stormwater, and that's it. We're happy to entertain, we don't have anything from Mr. Peden indicating that he thinks that it's fine that I can recall or know of. Mr. Peden's job isn't to enforce Title 20 where the plantings are listed. So, Mr. Peden sees detention things that are made out of concrete, and if they function, he signs off on them.
So the issue is not that
it's not that it isn't
functional,
working.
it's just that it doesn't meet the current
correct.
letter
So that's
of the code.
We do think, really, if you look at the conditions, I do think we would expect that they use the detention mix, but it doesn't actually, that's not indicated here. So if you wanted to indicate in the condition related to the detention pond, that we just want it to be shown on the plat. This is a detention pond, and detention ponds are supposed to be in common area. If you wanted to amend that to say this particular one doesn't have to, meet landscaping, that would be fine to clarify, I think.
All right. Sure, please.
That detention pond is already part of a PUD for the overall benefit of everybody up there. So the maintenance and the inspection, it has to be inspected yearly by an engineer to make sure it's functioning properly. And we have been taking care of that. And once it's turned over to the HOA, they will maintain it. And so it already is a common area, and it was platted, and there is documents that were drawn up by the lawyer to address that. And by the way, the acoustics in here is terrible. I rely on lip reading, and I can't see her lips. I don't know what she said. I had to rely on what I read in the packet.
All right.
I'll
Thank
make
you.
one more point. Sorry, Mr. Shaw, I forgot about that. I'll make one more point. This primary plat amendment is amending that existing plat. So that's why we're clarifying. They're replatting the entirety of Section 5, not
Right.
just the new portion.
So this will replace whatever was on
Right.
file previously, so we
Yep.
just need to make sure that it's accurate to
Yes.
reflect what's
Thank
already
you.
there. Got it. All right, any other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Kinsey, go ahead.
All right, I do seem to recall from December that there was some stormwater and drainage concerns. It isn't involving this area, is it?
Yes, so the question was about like this interface here. It was the interface with the neighborhood to the east was where the drainage questions were asked. We did not receive any additional information from the petitioner related to that beyond that CBU will have to approve the final plans. I do think one thing we thought could be helpful was clarifying what landscaping trees are staying there as opposed to it being clear cut and then, speeding up any sort of drainage runoff that may come from this site. So it was for the new area immediately adjacent to the neighborhood to the east northeast.
Okay, so this detention pond has no relevance or doesn't help?
I don't know the details. Mr. Shaw said that it's for the entirety of Ridgefield, other areas may drain to it, but I think the concern, and there may be neighbors on the line, was more of like a direct water coming off of this site into their yards and things.
Okay. All right. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Commissioner Cochran, go ahead.
So I want to go back to the paired patio homes real quick. Do you have a percentage difference in, the plan that the developer has proposed, I'm leaning to wanting to support that, but respectfully, I understand, our charges to, for the impervious surface and, do you have a percentage difference between what the two different plans? I mean, how much are we talking about, the difference?
No, I don't think so. There is something from the petitioner related to, it's on page 23 of the packet, related to the impervious surface coverage of both of their proposals. I may have it somewhere, but I don't have it right this second, that when engineering staff looked at the shared driveways, they were able to indicate that it was going to be less than what the 10 driveway proposal would be.
It's just important that, as a community member and for the developer, you want this for him to sell out and for this to be successful for the families to live there. I guess my fear is this doesn't seem real marketable what's being proposed, and I'd be fearful. But not that that's our purview,
Sure.
but just
Yeah, so it is something for you all to weigh. We talked about this, I think, last time. The main, I would say, one of the things that you get by not allowing cul-de-sacs anymore is more connectivity. That's not something we're getting with this plan. So the thing that we are getting is code compliance for maintenance, less street crosswalks for someone coming along here, obviously. But this is definitely a borderline case here.
Okay, great, thanks.
Any other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Seabour.
I think just maybe staff could clarify the cut down trees to plant trees thing. I think there's an answer, and it maybe involves just updating plans to clarify where trees exist and what we preserve, but just wanted to understand that.
So with the history of this, we just want to be clear what's staying. So yes, the answer is updating the landscape plan to indicate, as opposed to just showing clouds or this is something that we see in landscape plans, where it's just like, oh, there are trees here. You can tell because we put, fuzzy lines. So you can see those here. How are they going to build house 55 and 56 without cutting those trees down? Do they have a plan for that? If they do, that's great. Then they can save those trees. But based on our experience in this subdivision and other places, they will take down trees that they otherwise said they were going to preserve. So we want to be very clear about which trees are staying. And if there aren't trees staying here, we think there should be trees here as they originally proposed. Even Mr. Shaw brought up the tree between 14 and 13. There were specimen trees identified all over this property that they agreed to keep in 2008, and they're gone. So we need to make sure that we understand, especially the trees that are more functional, like these buffer area trees, what's staying, and if it can't stay, that's fine, but then we need to know the amounts that are there so that they can be replaced. So for us, the way we wrote it in was that the buffer they were showing in the 2008 plan should come back. We're open to saying, if you're saying that in that 15 years, trees have grown up here and we want to keep them, that's also fine. We would like those to be enumerated.
Just to follow up on that, those trees would need to be enumerated on the site plan, though, correct?
Correct, on this final plan.
So if the solution to this issue is update the site plan to reflect the trees that are there and that are going to be preserved, we can't take action on this tonight.
Well, you
Is
could
that correct?
amend, yes. Well, I think one thing you could do, so it's one of the bullet points under number 8, right, where we just included the tree buffer originally shown on the 2008 plans south and east of the paired homes needs to be added to the plan. I think you could amend that and say, or you could indicate that
Site plan should be-
density already exists and you're retaining it.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I can ask
Yes,
another question.
please.
Can you comment on, I don't know, for staff maybe, and for the petitioner, what does the street appeal look like when you take the cul-de-sac out? So you've got these 6 driveways or, like, how does that feel from the street perspective?
Right, so that's what we were saying, this is kind of a borderline case where because they would like to keep these 10 homes here in a design configuration that they already have, it's not like we're looking at this as a clean slate, that then you have to deal with how do you get vehicles to each of those houses, and is 6 driveways too many for this area. If you look, for example, further west, roughly that distance is going to be 4 or 5 lots in that developed area, or even, up to the north, which each are going to have their own driveway. I think from the street, it's going to read like the other single family. When you're in it, it might feel different. But we have seen kind of alternative parking, drive access developments, like the Short Street development that we saw at Short and Maxwell is very non-traditional, parking to the side. They don't even have vehicular access to their houses. We have seen more recently kind of a more co-living aesthetic of houses being kind of close together and people being more comfortable with that, I think, than they used to be. But yes, I think it's a good question because here it's only 1 cut and then otherwise it's 6. But I think it would read based on the distance as the same as the cuts for the single family lots because they're not much bigger than the lineal distance of this lot.
Commissioner St. John.
Just a follow-up clarifying question. So when you said it's borderline, the cul-de-sac, can you just explain what you mean?
Sure. I think what I'm saying is we won't be surprised if you approve the old version. We don't think you should because it doesn't meet code. And, it does have some issues that we have raised, but I don't think that they're earth-shattering issues. And I think Mr. Shaw has raised some interesting issues, for example, with the stormwater that they've already installed in the eyebrow area. And, is it worthwhile to make this meet code and have that large expense? So I don't think we would be surprised. I'm not gonna go home and cry about this one if you don't, if you decide to give the waivers. We just think, we try to kind of see it a little bit more black and white where it's like, can they do it? They can do it. They should probably just do it the way the code is asking them to do. But then you all have the purview to say, are there reasons based on those subdivision standards to not do that?
Okay. And then also to clarify the detention area, you're saying we could approve, have it labeled appropriately, and set aside the requirement to change up the landscaping there?
I think just saying allowing to continue as turf grass,
As
which is
is.
basically what
Okay.
it, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I would suggest upon approval by CBU that, I'm sure that Mr. Shaw has had that conversation with Mr. Peden. Mr. Peden isn't even in that position anymore, so it's not really his call anymore. So I would suggest that you do that as well, and then we'll just verify with them that it's fine.
Okay. I mean, I don't love the mowing part of it environmentally, but it sounds like it might be serving as a informal pocket park on its own, which sounds valuable to the people who live there. So, okay, thanks.
Any other questions from commissioners? Go ahead, Commissioner Smith.
I always have a hard time with compliance issues, just the way I think about it. When we say this, that it's a compliance issue and pretty much it's a wash, doesn't it make it more onerous for the developers and the people to get things like this done? And in that case, if it is kind of a wash, the planning and transportation, wouldn't it just be easier just to say, okay, for future, we would just say, like it to be done, if it's a new development or whatever, but since it's already developed, we're just going to give that development a pass and kind of like just say, okay, I know you're kind of even saying that to us, but in the recommendation it says no overall, but wouldn't it make it just easier for everybody if you all just said we might as well just give this a pass this time, or is it that it's just really important to follow those regulations as they are from your department and as they are set?
Sure, so a couple of things. If this actually was developed, like you said, this has already been developed. It hasn't been. The area that's vacant isn't developed, so it's under current code. So we can't say, oh, you had a plan for it that you didn't build. We can't do that. Yes, it is important for us as a department to be flexible, which is, I think, why, we're being honest that the code says they should build it this way. You may think that the repercussions of that are too much. And we do want to make your jobs as easy as possible, but sometimes your jobs are just hard, as ours are as well.
Yeah, thank you.
And we need to look and see what the code says. I mean, one of the findings for a waiver is that it doesn't, go against the transportation plan. I mean, the transportation plan is not talking about cul-de-sacs, any cul-de-sac anywhere in there. So it's hard for us to make that decision, and that's something, why you all are here to be able to do those discretionary things that we don't necessarily aren't empowered to do.
Yeah, and thank you very much for letting me ask that question, because it's just how my brain thinks is sometimes compliance issues are just become onerous. And so thank you very much for being honest and everything. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions from commissioners? All right. We will then move to public comment. Are there any members of the public who would like to make comment on this petition, which number is escaping me, but PUD DP 2421. If you'd like to make comment, step up to the podium, state your name for the record. If you're online and joining us and like to make comment, just look for the reactions button and click on the raise hand button, and we will recognize you when it is your turn. You'll have 5 minutes to speak.
Hi, thanks. My name's Greg Alexander. If I understand correctly, the design originally had a connector path to North High School that's been removed from the plan. I want to tell you all about a different connector path on the other side of North High School at the southeast corner of campus near 3400 North Valley View Drive. To speak plainly, it's a real piece of garbage. Its entrance opening is only 30 inches wide, I think too narrow for ProWag. The path itself is about 5 feet wide, but it's got fences immediately touching it, and the neighbors on both sides let weeds grow through those fences, so the clear width is much less. There's a tree growing in the path, and its roots have created a 6-inch vertical discontinuity. There's another tree that has fallen on one of the fences, narrowing it further. When it was built, they didn't give any thought at all to the grade, so some parts are level, some parts are very steep, far too steep for ProWag. You couldn't get a wheelchair through here, even if you were carrying it empty. Like, it would be a real struggle. And once you get through the path onto MCCSC's property, there is a sidewalk that goes to the school, but it doesn't have ADA curb ramps. It's just a hard 6-inch drop. I love this garbage path. I live 2 miles south of there, and even so, this path is so attractive to me that it's one of the 2 options I consider recommending to my children when they go to North in 4 years. So that they can have independent transportation, which is so important for young adults, for teenagers. I don't think it's an exaggeration for me to say this garbage path is the single best piece of pedestrian and bike infrastructure that connects to North High School. Even though it's deeply flawed, it is just so much better than the alternatives, which is, Prow Road or Kinser Pike. For decades, we have been digging this hole on the north side of insufficient connectivity, especially for pedestrians. And now we're looking at making that same mistake again. We're building a new development that will be right next to North that won't connect to it. It should have a path connecting to North High School. There will be brand new houses, not even a quarter mile from the front door of North High School. And the only connection that they can use as pedestrians will be almost 3 times that distance. A 5-minute walk becomes a 15-minute walk. And that 15-minute walk will be along Kinser Pike. They'll be breathing exhaust fumes. They won't even be able to hear themselves think over the noise of traffic. It's even worse on the Prow Road side. MCCSC actually built a sidewalk along its Prow Road frontage, but that sidewalk doesn't connect to the school. Oh yeah, no, I know what you're going to do. It's good. The high school site plan is severely defective. They didn't provide access from the rights of way to the building for pedestrians. We can't allow the fact that mistakes have been made to justify repeating those mistakes into the future. And here's the part that really hit me. I went there this morning to inspect a 100-foot sidewalk gap along Prow Road. And there was a gosh darn goat trail through the forest. People had trampled down the vegetation with their feet. People actually use this deficient sidewalk that I've identified. And the city doesn't care. MCCSC doesn't care. I also inspected where the new path should go that was shown on the original diagrams. There is a grade, but it's not severe. It may be impossible to meet ProWag, but it is definitely possible to make a very useful connection. I understand there are challenges. A defective path is better than no path. ProWag is supposed to be a guide to making excellent paths, not an excuse to put up a wall to pedestrians. The path is essential to this project. Both new and existing residents of Ridgefield deserve better for their children. It's very hard to correct the mistakes of the past, but we simply can't do that if we keep making them. The reason we don't like cul-de-sacs is that they're harmful to connectivity. Let them build the cul-de-sac and fix the connectivity problem. Please refuse to approve the project until there's a firm commitment to install a path to North High School, at least to the edge of MCCSC's property, even if that path will have deficiencies. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment on PUD 24-21?
We have 2 on Zoom.
All right.
You should be able to unmute.
Hi. First, I want to say thank you. I did not get your name, man in the red hat. I completely agree with you. I live in this subdivision, and I'm one of the people that is aware of that little goat path that is extremely muddy when it gets wet. But yes, there should be a connectivity path. I want to add that when my husband bought our house in 2011, Bob Shaw said to him about our oldest, who was in elementary school at the time, oh, there will be a path to North High School that she can walk on by the time she's in high school. She actually teaches middle school now. So that gives you an idea of how long this project has been going on. and the things that have been unfulfilled. So I do want to address a couple of things that have been said. About the detention pond, I would never call it an informal pocket park. That paints a really lovely picture that simply doesn't exist. We do use it. People do take their dogs over there. It is a mucky kind of mud pit. It's pretty scrubby. It's an open space, and so it does get used, but an idyllic picture of a community coming together and creating a park out of a lovely area. Please don't misunderstand that that's what's happening. I want to address the bond and the sidewalks. The sidewalks were taken up in August of last year with no warning to residents at all. As you've seen from the pictures, this is an exceptionally small neighborhood. Winter Suite has never gone all the way through, so we have no connection to the Kinzer side. And as we've all just talked about, there's no continuous south sidewalk on Prow. The only access out of this neighborhood on foot is heading north on Prow Road, and that was removed in August of last year. So people with strollers, the multiple disabled people in this neighborhood, people walking dogs have been isolated. I walk my dog primarily, I'm walking again, but I was not for a long time. So I spent months loading a wheelchair and a dog into a car twice a day. These sidewalks need to be fixed post haste, period. And that's a huge priority for this neighborhood. I also want to add something on the North High School issue, the safety issue. We know a lot about teenage brains. If that path to North gets removed, people are not going to take the time to walk around to the other side, and they're going to try to walk on Prow, and it is not safe. There's a hill without sight visibility in that very short stretch between the edge of this neighborhood and North. And if people try to walk on that road, they don't see the cars coming and the cars don't see them. And then I just want to clarify one other thing. I'm sure there are things I don't know and that I've missed, but my neighbors and I don't cut trees down, we plant trees. So the idea that we remove trees for our fences, many of us have planted trees. I know one other neighbor on this call, like I have, that really likes to plant trees. And so the idea that any of us were over here chopping trees down to put up fences, no, we've been adding trees to this community, and we all feel strongly about that, or many of us feel strongly about that. I think those are all of my critical notes at the moment. And I will step aside and let other people comment.
Ma'am, would you
Thank you.
please state your name for the record?
Sure, Deirdre Sheets.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one more on Zoom. You should be able to unmute. There you go.
Good evening. This is Amy Ali. I'm actually also a resident of this neighborhood. First and foremost, I just can't reiterate enough what Ms. Sheets said about the sidewalks. We have children, we have toddlers, we have babies, we have people with disabilities, and we cannot safely leave our neighborhood for almost 8 months. This week, it'll be 8 months we haven't had sidewalks. So that is a major point of contention. The second point of contention I would like to bring up is that we do not have an HOA. When we bought our homes, the documentation upon purchasing our homes, where it says HOA, it said no. A couple years ago, Mr. Shaw put documentation on our doors saying that we have an HOA and that he was the president. All of us neighbors got together and had a meeting. None of us want an HOA, and all of our purchasing documents say there is not an HOA. And that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on PUD DP 24-21? Any more online, Jackie? No? All right, last call for public comment. Just a reminder, if you're online and want to comment, just click the reactions button, click the raise hand option, and we will recognize you. All right, seeing none, we are back to the commission for any additional questions, final comments, or a motion. Commissioner St. John.
Yeah, thank you. So can someone, whether staff or the petitioner, identify where the sidewalk is that was removed?
I'm so sorry,
That's
Ms. St.
okay.
John. My question to him was, do we go to the petitioner after this part for his remaining time?
I think that if there are questions that commissioners want to pose to the
He just had
petitioner.
remaining time, and I got confused.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
before we entertain a motion,
Great.
we'll
Thank
allow
you.
the petitioner to use any remaining time.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, go ahead, Ms. St. John.
So where are the sidewalks that were removed?
Oh, hold on. Hold on.
Well, let's allow staff to maybe pull up the illustration for us.
Sorry, I'm trying to, oh, here, this is it. It's already doing it. Great. Okay. So in the areas that are already developed, in the northern portion in section 1, when we did the landscaping review before we sent the letter in 2020 indicating like, hey, we need to get this off the ground. This is what we have for existing conditions here. That was when engineering was also in planning and transportation. And so that along with that went a review of these sidewalks, so the existing sidewalks that were already in the development. So you can see they start here on Hackberry, and then all of this northern developed area, and then I think some on Prow. So this year, when we were, or last year, I'm sorry, when we were moving forward more with this, saying like, hey, we need to go to Plan Commission, we waited for quite some time for the exhibit related to the property line to North High School, because we wanted to make sure that there were actually trees in the tree preservation area. And when they went to start last year, what should have happened was that they submitted a drawing indicating what they were going to do to fix the issues identified by the engineering staff, but instead they just ripped out all the areas that had issues identified. So engineering staff then needed a drawing to show what is being put back, because they have to be able to approve that plan, that then sets the bond amount as well. And I believe we got that drawing last week. And Mr. Seaborg can correct me if I'm wrong. So it is sprinkled all throughout this development. Sidewalk panels were taken out, ramps and things of all different pieces of sidewalk.
So instead of becoming compliant, they just pulled out the pieces that...
Well, I think the idea was the public improvements manager at the time, Mr. Shaw, contacted and said, hey, can you come out and show me what I need to do? But that's not the process. That's not how we do, you know, she doesn't come out and just say, oh, this needs to be that, or this. You have to, we told you what was insufficient and why, and then you have to submit an engineered drawing how you're going to fix it. And so by that time, I mean, he just took them out before submitting any of that information. All the paperwork things should have been done first, and so that they could be taken out and immediately replaced.
And they've been out 8 months?
Yes. So we are in this. That's what I was mentioning before. We are in a very weird spot with enforcement. We're already doing enforcement. There isn't a lot that we can do besides pushing this process along, getting this done so we can move on to the next step so he can finish.
Okay. My second question, then I'm done. The path to North High School, is that, it's viable, it's not viable? I mean, even if it's...
I think Mr. Seaborg may have had comments as well from his staff on this. I know Mr. Copper, who was here in December, was the one who, he went out and looked. it's definitely has some slope issues. When the petitioner's representative, Mr. Rigger, reached out to MCCSC, Mr. Fleener at MCCSC, they were not interested in the path. That's not necessarily something for you to, you could still require the path. As was pointed out by the public, people are walking through this area. I think the concern from staff, and Mr. Seaborg can correct me, was just that it's hard to say on its face without further engineering whether or not it can be kind of done in a safe way for pedestrians. So again, if you want to leave that in, we'll figure it out.
Okay, thank you.
Just to follow up on that, when you say leave that in, it's not currently shown on the site plan, is it?
It is shown on
It
the
is?
site plan. It's condition number 10 is to remove it.
Got it. Okay.
Can you show us?
Yeah. Would you mind
Yeah, sure.
pulling
Just
up
a
the
sec.
site plan and showing?
Okay.
Is it on both versions of the site plan?
Yes, but you mean the original version and the new version?
Yes.
Yes, but the location has moved because of the change in the location of the tree preservation. Hold on. Thanks, Brad.
Yeah, Mr. Shaw, you got some time remaining. If you'd like to use it now, I would typically encourage you to wait until we've had some discussion so you don't use up all your time before all the questions are raised. But if you've got something to comment specifically on this issue of the site path, I think now would be a good time.
Ambivalent about the path. It was MCSC that didn't want it initially, but it was put as a condition of approval. And so we show it on our plans. I don't mind trying to put it in. One of the reasons that we changed the tree preservation area was so the path would go between two tree preservation areas, so it would be buffered from the homeowners. So if there was traffic and kids up and down that path, it wouldn't affect their yards or their houses. And so I personally, I'm ambivalent about it, but the MCCSC doesn't have a sidewalk there and no connected. It would be emptied out into that street there with no sidewalks.
Thank you.
Oh, God, what a mess.
So this is on page 32 of the packet, and it is here adjacent to the tree preservation. Is that correct, Mr. Myrick? That's right? Yeah. We had seen an iteration where it was like in the tree preservation, and Mr. Copper had some concerns about that. So it's kind of along the edge here.
Okay. Thank you.
And Mr. Enright Randolph has his hand raised on Zoom. I don't know if you saw it.
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Enright Randolph.
Yes, thank you. No worries if I wasn't noticed. I haven't had my video on, so it takes a little extra work to notice the virtual hand raised. Really, I think we should continue to look at this connection path. But also I wanted to indicate, sorry that I showed up late. I was going to mention that I have prior commitments, and I'm going to try to stay for the remainder of this petition, but after that I will be leaving, and I just wanted to make note of that so it could be put on the record. Jackie, I'll put something in the chat as I leave. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Commissioner Cochran, go ahead.
So this path connection to the MCCSC, is there, I mean, I know this area well. And it just comes into a hillside there almost, that because Prow Road is above that, where that path would be. I'm assuming the elevation's a little higher. It's steep, yeah.
It is steep.
Is there any arrangements with MCCSC to provide any connection there? Because really, it's going to just dump into an area that's kind of a steep hillside. I don't.
Well, so yeah, it would connect, I believe, or close to this existing roadway at North.
Okay.
Is that answering your question?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Seabour.
I think I've got a series of comments, and I'm happy if I miss things or people have other questions. But on the sidewalk piece, just to talk about the timing of bonds and estimates, a challenge from the city side right now is that the roads have not been accepted into the city's inventory. So we at least have limited tools to require the sidewalks be installed properly. And once they are, that's one of the key things for the streets to be accepted into the streets inventory. But until we have that bond, there's little leverage that the city has. So that's where the timing and wanting to be timely, but also reasonable on what's physically possible to accommodate. So that's one, I think, just detail I wanted to share. On the connection to MCCSC, my understanding is that is being, or was driven by there being a cul-de-sac. And usually when there's a cul-de-sac, you then look for other alternatives to improve connectivity. So big picture, what's shown, this is where it's a little tricky for me going through the plans. There's a lot of different plans, and I'm not even sure all the time which ones are the plans that we would be approving and which ones are more illustrative. But the ones that show this pedestrian easement is in an area that would be pretty difficult to do, and maybe there are other ways to design it, but that would have other impacts to the site plan. So it's a complicated issue, and it may be difficult to get it to tie into MCCSC now, but 30 years from now, we don't know. Like Tri-North just redeveloped, so things could change in the future. So that's just, I think, an important thing for us to keep in mind. On the cul-de-sac and the eyebrow, just for those are just from a city maintenance perspective, really challenging, and over the cost of a lifespan of a road, hopefully hundreds and hundreds of years, these things it adds up and is a big burden. The eyebrow design, the way it's actually designed is more like an intersection, like the corners. It's not designed like a curve in a road, but it would be treated like a curve in a road. And so with the tweaked design, if you notice, the radius is a little different to reflect a low-speed curve in a residential street. So there's a lot of details that are coming into here. And I think I wanted to quickly try to mention, so I certainly support, I think, the staff's recommendation. I understand and support the desire for an MCCSC connection, but it is really tricky, and if it can't be made in an accessible way, there's things that we want to be very mindful of and careful of to make sure we're doing all that we can. So I just wanted to add a few tidbits there for some context.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Kinsey.
Yeah, this is incredibly complicated, and I realize that we're making lots of proposed and expected trade-offs. And I wonder, staff, if you can comment on the latest comment about the eyebrow and whether, is there a way that can be changed? I understand the concern about tearing out storm drainage, but is there any way that can be accommodated, the new alternative design be accommodated? Can it be the eyebrow and remove the eyebrow and retain the cul-de-sac, which would be even more Frankenstein than we're already talking about here?
I think,
or is it? Yeah.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think you could ask that. I mean, I think you could make that decision. We would maybe want to ask Mr. Rooker, are we getting, to Mr. Seabour's point, are we getting to the point where it's like we want this from A and this from B? Do we want to tell the petitioner this is what we'd like to see next month? Or do you want to say to the petitioner this is what we'd like to see next month? and we're prepared to vote on that, or I think that would kind of be up to you guys. I mean, the thing, they have a proposal that they're asking for. We have recommended that be changed. You can either approve or deny theirs, accept our amendment, or you can make your own amendment. We just, at some point, I think even our amendment was a little, we talked about it with legal, but it's a little atypical, and to do even more, I think we would maybe want to see a new design, or, that would be something for y'all to discuss, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If there are none immediately, I would, this is obviously a complex issue. It feels to me like we have a number of competing proposals here, and it's going to be difficult for us to come to consensus, and I fear that we may end up just passing whatever gets on the floor here first for the sake of expediency, and I don't think that's going to be the best outcome for anyone. I would request that maybe we just take a minute and hear from commissioners. I would appreciate your input. Are you okay with what the petitioner has proposed? Do you favor what staff has proposed? Do you favor some hybrid, as Commissioner Kinsey has suggested, that maybe keeps the cul-de-sac but not the eyebrow? I think before we can procedurally move forward, I think we need a sense of what commissioners would like to see. And I certainly don't want to slow this down, because I know the residents of this neighborhood are very eager to get their sidewalks back, and I'm very eager to see that happen. But we also want to make sure we do what's right here. So I would just maybe request, if you have any opinion at all, share it now, so at least we can kind of make sure we're moving in the right direction here. I'm just trying to understand if there is a resolution this evening, or if we really just need more time to hash this out. I mean, I'm very hesitant to do that, given how long it's already taken, but I don't want to ram something through just to be done with it. Commissioner Smith.
Commissioner Kinsey, did you want to go first? Okay. Yeah, I favor just approving it so that as it's the original design, so that we kind of get back to the momentum and let the developer finish out some of the conditions with the path and all those things that we've talked about. They're fantastic. The large part of the decision, I think, is to, in my mind, to go ahead with that, since it's kind of a 50%, 6 of one, half dozen the other. As far as that goes, let's move ahead. And some of the finer points that we've talked about with the path and sidewalks and the trees, it's all great, but the larger decision would help us move ahead and help Mr. Shaw move ahead with getting this, and then get the sidewalks back, and we'll be, finish up this. It's been hanging out for a while now. Let's not do a government thing and make it slow. Let's go ahead and make a decision and move ahead.
Thank you.
That's my thought.
Thank you. Any other comments, Commissioner St. John?
No, I didn't mean to jump ahead if you were, I didn't know if you were going.
Go down the road, it's fine.
Okay. Yeah, I'm inclined to think the cul-de-sac and just leave it and go with it. I would be in favor of a path to North High School for a whole bunch of reasons. I kind of don't care that it lands on MCCSC and there is no path, because I think they'll build one once it's there and people are using it. And I appreciate the comments from the public about that. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. The tree part, I mean, it just has to get worked out. Like, label the trees, let city know what the trees are that are there, and figure that out. That seems pretty basic. The removal of the sidewalks is real disappointing. I'm really surprised, like, as a matter of like good faith to the neighbors, that would have been done and left like that for 8 months. So that's a pretty tough fact for me to get past, but I am willing to potentially go in favor of the petitioner's request for the plan as drawn with the cul-de-sac, but real disappointed about the sidewalk removal. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Seymour.
Yeah, no, I think if a path can be put in and reasonably, that's a great thing. I do have some concerns with the eyebrow design in the site plan. I have concerns with other details of the site plan that led to a lot of the sidewalk issues that exist in the older vision. So I think we just need to make sure what we approve in a final plan is actually a good final plan. I'm optimistic or hopeful that Mr. Shaw and the developer team will, now that it sounds like a design maybe has been submitted to some of my staff, to start addressing some of those sidewalk issues I know he was hoping to last year. So hopeful that will still happen while some of these site plan issues are updated and clarified, so there's less conditions and we know what we really are voting on approving.
Thanks.
I would echo a lot of Commissioner St. John's comments as well. I'm inclined to go with the approved design, although the eyebrow does raise a little bit of a concern. I'm not sure what the storm drain situation is in that section specifically. I think we need to go through these 10 conditions to figure out what we're going to vote on tonight, and because we discussed the 60 days for 2 and 3, I believe, and then there's also a thought on number 9 about adding in that they wouldn't need to meet landscaping, and then of course we've got number 10 that we've discussed too. So
Great, thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Kinsey?
Yeah, this is just a mess, and as much as now I really understand why we should be opposed to cul-de-sacs. And, you know, the unfortunate thing is we're not getting any connectivity connections here, you know, even with the redesign. So to me, there's not much value. And as much as I am not in favor of compliance for compliance sake, I am in favor of what the policies and the practices were designed to do. So compliance offers important clarity and guidance for developers and the public, assurances that things are supposed to be the way they're supposed to be in the way that as a community we decided. So I really resent having to make alternative arrangements around complying with what we've decided as a community we want to see. So that's really hard to make a decision against what I think is in the best interest in the community. But this clearly, we're not getting anything that's really, that anyone would really want. So I think it's not worth it in this situation to make a lot of the alternatives, because we're not really gaining anything. But this is just not the way I think we should be doing this work. So with all of that said, the other thing is I would really want to make sure that we retain all the elements in here and to really look closely at whatever the 30 or 60-day bond issues that will get the sidewalks back into place. That is really egregious to me that those sidewalks were removed, and whatever we need to do to make sure that we get this through to get those sidewalks back in is absolutely critical. So for that public benefit and gain, I will move forward on this, whatever we can do. So that might be the staff issue that we really need with guidance with, is how do we arrange the conditions so that that element, whatever the putting forward, so that we get the sidewalks into city control so they can be put back in and approved. So that's really important. The detention pond, to me, is less of a concern. If it's functioning as it's supposed to function, that's okay, but it definitely needs to be labeled as such. And, I might be in favor of putting in the amended landscape in that area if it will help at all. I think those were the main issues. Oh, the pathway, I like the idea of building a path, and I do think that it would be added by MC or considered an addition to MCCS property if it's built. So I'd like to consider it, but I'm very concerned about whether it meets any accessibility guidelines. So this is just, there's not anything really great here to build this on. That's it.
Thanks. Commissioner Cochran?
I would support moving forward with the plan as presented and with the subdivisions waivers as requested by the petitioner. With one caveat, I do feel you need the 60 days for the bonding. I don't disagree with all the comments that have been made, but I think we need to finish the subdivision. I think we need to give you the ability to do that. So,
Thanks. Any other comments?
To expedite everything, Commissioner Kinsey, I think you said it extremely well. I really appreciate the public in this petition in particular, because that's definitely, as Commissioner St. John said, that's weighing on me very heavily with the route that was taken. Living in a neighborhood myself, can't imagine that. I'd be furious. So whatever we can do to move this through, to get those sidewalks back in, I think that's a big piece for me.
I agree with everybody. We need to move forward. We need to get this done. I agree with Commissioner Corcoran. The original plan makes more sense for the patio homes, and I understand the situation here because this was a plan that was done so long ago, and the city is having to look at the old plan and what we have in code right now. So let's move forward.
All right, thank you. So it sounds to me like we have some consensus that we want to move forward with granting the waivers and approving the original plan. We need to make some changes to the conditions in order to satisfy everyone here. And it sounds to me like we're comfortable with sort of delegating the updating of the tree plot documentation to staff. I just want a little clarification, though, from staff. You're comfortable with that? I mean, I think I heard you say that you don't really care where the trees are as long as they're documented as to where they are. Is that something that just can be cleaned up at the staff level? We don't need to wait to see.
So you're talking about for the tree buffer east in the southeast portion?
That's
east
correct.
and south of the paired
Yes.
area? Yeah, I think we'd be comfortable saying, so the condition currently says the tree buffer originally shown on the 2008 plan south and east of the paired homes needs to be added to the plan, or trees to the same density need to be shown as preserved or to be planted.
And is that, I'm sorry, is that spelled
It's
out?
under
in more-
number 8. Hold on.
Oh, I got it. Needs to be to the plan. Existing trees, existing proposed tree. Yeah, so there's nothing in that language in 8 that would require planting of new trees if they're already there. It just requires that they be documented.
Yeah, I would suggest adding just the clarification that's on there now.
Or, right, so, or trees of the, yes, okay, that's fair. One follow-up question I have on that, though. We heard some comment that there are trees that have been planted by homeowners, not by the developer. How can we require that the developer preserve trees that were planted by the homeowner?
No, so this is why so in the area to the north where they were showing buffer along the hospital,
Yeah.
that's why we said just take that out. Because we know from speaking to the homeowners and seeing the documentation. When Mr. Shaw sold those properties to them, there's nothing that they knew they had to keep those trees.
Right.
So
Okay.
otherwise, we'd have to, survey each one, and that ship, I think.
So we're strictly talking about in
The
common
undeveloped area.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we aren't proposing any buffers in the developed area.
Okay.
I do want to say, just because you guys can't see the Zoom, that a couple of the members of the public did re-raise their hands, and I told them we already had public comment time, but that I would mention it to you in case you wanted to.
Thank you. Yes, public comment period has come and gone. We certainly would appreciate your input. If you want to send a message in the chat, we will certainly take a look at it, but we can't have a second public comment period. We need to keep the agenda moving here. So it sounds to me like the consensus is we'd like to see the waivers granted, approval of the site plan as submitted, perhaps removal of condition number 10, which removes the connection easement. So maybe with, and then also an update to condition number 3. So if someone would like to make that motion,
I'm putting a draft of the condition of potential amendments to that condition here, or on the screen, to take out condition 1.
Yep.
Sorry.
remove condition 1, and we've modified from 30 to 60 days. And just, can I ask a clarifying question on that? Is that has to happen before the sidewalk construction will be able to?
Well, that's what so yes and no. No, the sidewalk that's in is platted. It's part of Phase 1 of Section 5. So normally, when we get a secondary plat, that's when something gets platted and recorded, a bond comes in at that time to a public improvements bond. That did happen, 10 years ago, and that bond was expired. So I believe that once Mr. Seabor's staff approves the amount for Mr. Rickert, that bond can be pulled immediately.
Let me.
As long as it takes.
Let me ask a more direct question. If we moved that to 90 days, does that slow down the construction of these sidewalks?
I guess I want to clarify, because there's the current subdivision exists. Right-of-way has been platted. Are we voting on a plat for the new areas or rededicating right-of-way that already exists in other areas?
It's an amendment, so we're amending that Phase 5 plat that exists now, only for Section 1, and the new plat will be Section 1 and Section 2. Okay. So there aren't a lot of I don't think any right-of-way changes were made up there as far as dimensions for area or anything along those lines. They're just replatting it because they had to make changes to the final plan.
Yeah, so I don't think there's anything big picture that would hold up a potential public improvement bond for the first phase of work. That could happen independent of us voting on anything today. That really could happen.
Yes, I think, right. I think my idea was to put it in here just to be if that isn't happening, then this at least is giving us a timeline where then we as planning can start enforcement and say you're not meeting the conditions of your approval. We're already doing enforcement, but yeah.
Okay, thanks. And then I can't quite see, but is in this version that you've got on the screen, have you removed number 10?
Oh, no, thank you.
Could I?
Yes. He wants to know if the pedestrian connection, the location that they've proposed, he wants to know if it can be moved. So I'm wondering.
Yeah. We're talking a lot about the plan. And I have no idea what the plan is. Like, what page, what drawing, what site plan are we actually talking
I
about?
think what we're talking about is the plan as submitted that shows both the cul-de-sac and the eyebrow.
So is it like page 34 of our packet? And I just...
Well, to be clear, no one's made a motion yet,
Sure,
so this is all somewhat speculative. But I think what I'm hearing, what I hear the consensus is that we would be approving the site plan as shown on page 21 of the packet.
So that's the landscape plan that doesn't show a pedestrian connection.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, if you go to the packet,
Also, page 25 is, 25, well, yeah, all of these are showing the same
the
configuration.
petitioner's submitted plat starts on page 30 of the packet, and the only thing that has changed from when they submitted this initially is if you are going to approve the waivers, the only thing that changes is the landscape plan with the addendum that we got for February.
Which we would not see a final version of in the packet because some of the conditions are calling for additional updates to that landscape plan.
Correct, yeah. But the conditions are amending that version.
Right. So what we'd be talking about is approving the site plan as represented in pages 30 through 36, 37, 38, 39. Let's see, keeps going. 46. Yeah. Okay. I don't typically do this, but I'm going to just go ahead and make the motion myself, just to try to sort through this. I move approval of, of DP, I'm sorry, give me 1 second. Let me pull this together.
You read that on the screen, Brad?
What's the petition?
Yes.
Number? 20.
Oh, look, thank you. All right, so I move that we adopt the proposed findings and approve the final plan and preliminary plat amendment, PUD DP 2421, and approve the requested subdivision waivers with the following conditions as appear on the screen. And just to recap the changes from what was in the packet. Number one, this approval approves the final plan and preliminary plat that begins on page 30 of the packet with the amended landscape plan submitted for the February Plan Commission hearing, and therefore not the alternative plan that was submitted by staff. And we are amending condition number 2 and 3 to allow for 60 days for phase 1 of section 5. We are eliminating condition number 10, and we are adding also to condition number 8 that the tree buffer originally shown on the 2008 plan south and east of the paired homes need to be added to the plan, or trees of the same density need to be preserved or planted. Is there a second for that motion?
All right. I'll second it.
All right. We now have a motion and a second. Is there any final discussion before we call the roll? Commissioner Seaboard.
Sorry. I guess just to understand, if maybe this is a question for staff, if this plan is approved, truly I see a lot of concerns in the drawings, but I don't know if they're technical enough in nature that they could still be addressed through a grading permit. Other things that we've talked about were bump outs at intersections. Literally, some of the issues with the sidewalks that we had on the prior sections were due to the design that we're literally about to approve right now. And so I just want to make sure that those, if this is approved, those could still be addressed, knowing that the sidewalk issues that exist, and I feel like why we're making a sense of urgency, could still happen if we vote on this or not. So I'm a little personally nervous about this direction, but just wanted to, for my own sake, understand what, from an engineering perspective, we would be looking at.
Okay. A couple things. Yes, I think the design in the right-of-way details is something that, Plan Commission doesn't typically, they have purview over very specific things. So for example, whether or not cul-de-sacs could be in, requiring street trees. So if there are bump outs that need to be put in, I do think that can be done after. I will note that in the staff report, we did say that the petitioner is still working with the engineering staff to address other concerns raised at the hearing related to safe pedestrian ramp design. A couple of those issues might require slight changes in the property lines of the adjacent parcels. The department has spoken to the petitioner and they elected to go forward. And we let them know at that time, if these become so significant that these parcels are changing, you're gonna have to come back. Do you want to just wait? And they didn't. So, now that's been 4 months. And so I know that they have continued to work with your staff. But yes, I think the design of how those intersections are going to work is something that we understand is still in flux and feel comfortable with letting continue to happen. As in the secondary plat, those things won't be included.
An intersection, like I mentioned, where the eyebrow is, there's really a very tight corner like you would at an intersection, but it's a curve in the road, which would require adjusting property lines, which would mean what we're approving now we would have to bring back, or we would just be locked into that design forever.
So I think the UDO allows for some minor changes. So if we're not adding lots, and then, there's just a threshold, right? So if we are saying this is a new design, then we would come back. If we don't think that, then it would be able to be done at staff level.
I'd be happy to add another condition that calls out that we're authorizing staff to make those minor adjustments, just to make sure that's clear.
Let's see. I'm so sorry. I'm almost ready. Does that seem comfortable? Does that make you comfortable, Andrew, or do you want it to be more specific?
I'm comfortable with the vagueness of it.
I'm not thrilled with the vagueness of it because I don't know that
That's fine.
there's
Yeah.
a.
Mr. Rooker, do you have a suggestion?
Because in this, of course, what if petitioner and the staff don't agree on that design? I don't know. I think maybe we should be more specific to say the commission will delegate final approval of roadway design to staff.
Hold on, sorry, I want to see what Mr. Rooker has to say here. He was muted.
Yeah, I think I'm comfortable with the vagueness of it, but we should all be conscious of the fact that there's still a possibility, depending on what comes up, that this would have to be brought back to PC, as Ms. Scanlon pointed out. So it's hard because we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah. I think I would, I think we got to, I think we just got to keep it moving, and I would just say, please don't bring it back. Please find a way to come to an agreement on this. Get these sidewalks back in for these poor people. But if, I think I'm comfortable with that. I'm happy to accept that as a friendly amendment to my motion. So my motion stands, and does the second
And I
stand?
would still second.
All right. Is there any final discussion amongst commissioners? Commissioner St. John.
So just as a final comment or question to clarify for members of the public, what, Ms. Scanlon, does this do to compel the petitioner to put the sidewalk back together in an expeditious manner?
Yes.
What?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
You also have, it seems like double duty trying with the technology tonight
That's all right.
too. So I understand. But what about this, especially for just the
Sure.
public who's listening, what about this compels the petitioner to put the sidewalk back together quickly?
Sure. So number 3. But I will say, and again, if Mr. Seaboard isn't aware of this, I think that this is correct. I believe an estimate has already been submitted. I believe one was received last week. So I'm sure that staff is, reviewing that. And so then what would happen is once they can come to an agreement with Mr. Riggert, who is not here right now, and so probably also not receiving emails right now, once that agreement can be made, then that bond can be pulled for the sidewalks in the platted portion, which is phase 1 of section 5. So this is just as kind of a stopgap, so that has to be done within the next 2 months, but I think it's actually already happening. This is kind of just to put something there to ensure that it does happen.
So the public's looking at no sooner than 60 days then for that, if not much longer.
I think it will be sooner, is what I'm saying. I think that this process that this guarantees is actually already happening, but I still want to include this just to make sure the ball keeps rolling.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? All right. Mr. Shaw, you got a little time left. Would you like to say anything before we call the roll? I'm not sure how much time, Jackie.
Let me explain something about this. The reason the sidewalks were torn out was because the planning inspector cited them as not meeting handicap standards. And they were built according to the approved plans, but the approved plans did not specify the correct design, the one that should have been designed. And so I tore them out, and the way we used to do with sidewalks was we would form them up, and then the inspector would come out and look to make sure the stone was there and everything was correct. Well, when she came out and looked at it, she said, "No, this isn't it." And so we've been negotiating about this for some time, and I paid Riggert to redesign the sidewalks to meet the handicap standards that are now in place. And as soon as they approve the plans that we have resubmitted, then we'll get right on it. They're already formed up. It's just whether or not I've got to make more changes to them. So I apologize to the people up there. The one area that they were really concerned about that I had taken out, I went back there and because one of the women was concerned about trick-or-treaters. So I went back up and I got all of it that was already meeting, it was able to meet handicap standards, and I did that work so to satisfy those tenants. But believe me, I want them in as soon as possible. You can't imagine the heat I'm taking from people up there over it, and I just didn't. I thought I could do it without running into trouble, but engineering-wise, I couldn't meet it. Where I thought, we were like at 2.1% of slope, that won't meet it. It has to be 2.0 or less, and so I had to do some re-engineering to make that work.
All
So
right.
I'll get right on it.
Thank you. All right. Jackie, would you please call the roll?
Sure. So this is for approval of the final plan and primary plat amendment for PUD DP 2421 with the amended conditions. There are 11. I'm not going to read them again, but we have them written and they were on the screen. So those will be available for minutes. Seabour.
No.
Cockrum.
Yes.
Kinsey.
Yes.
Ko-Rodke.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
St. John.
Yes.
Whistler.
Yes.
Ballard.
Yes.
And Burrell. Yes. 8-1, thank you.
All right, thank you. The motion passes. We do have 2 more petitions to hear this evening, but I think we all desperately need 5 minutes before we start the next petition. So I'm going to call for a 5-minute recess. It is now 7:47. We'll reconvene at 7:52. Thank you. Thank you for indulging that short break. Our next petition is SP 09-23, Core SVA Bloomington Plateau 2 LLC, property at 2038 North Walnut Street. And we have Eric Grulich, the case manager, here to present. Take it away, Eric.
Thank you, Brad. Eric Grulich with the Bloomington Planning and Transportation Department. So as Mr. Whistler mentioned, this is case SP-09-23 for Core SVA for a property at 2038 North Walnut Street. This is on the north side of town. It's approximately 2-acre piece of property that is located in the mixed-use student housing district. All surrounding zoning districts to the northeast and south, or to the north and east, are mixed-use student housing. To the south is a planned unit development, and to the west you have parks and open space that constitute the Miller Showers Park. So the petitioner is here tonight to request major site plan approval to allow for the construction of a new mixed-use building on the site. This would have approximately 1,500 square feet of commercial space with 172 dwelling units. So the petitioner, as part of this petition, is also requesting approval for the use of the sustainable development incentives and the affordable housing incentives. So the site currently is undeveloped. It was most recently used as a restaurant. That use has been removed for some time. It's currently being used as somewhat of a staging ground and a construction office for the construction of the buildings to the south. However, that's pretty much wrapped up, and so now the petitioner is moving forward to develop this with their own plans for the mixed-use building. To the north of this, you have the Hampton Inn. To the south, as I mentioned, is the Verve student housing complex that was approved 2 or 3 years ago. And then to the east of this, you have the Plato's Court apartments, which are owned by the petitioner but are not part of this development petition. So as I mentioned, this was a former use of the Great Wall. There's a lot of grade change that happens on this site. As you move east along here from Walnut Street north, there's considerable grade change, and so the petitioner has designed a building that has a lot of staggered levels throughout that building, kind of take advantage of that grade change across the property. So they do have an entrance, pedestrian entrance on the west side of the building, as well as on the north side of the building, and then a driveway on the east side that goes into the building to access the 4 levels of parking that are contained within the building. So this is the proposed site plan for the project. This would involve removing the sidewalk that is along Walnut Street and constructing a new compliant sidewalk with our transportation plan that would require a 10-foot sidewalk, which the petitioner has shown. There's a shared access drive that uses this site that accesses the Hampton Inn to the north, as well as the other development to the east. So that will be staying in its location with this project. We expect that it will be pretty much very substantially altered in terms of being torn up as part of the construction of this. So it will be rebuilt, but we'll be staying in the same location and width and size as it currently is located. So with this, they would be installing a new sidewalk and tree plot along the south side of that drive. Whenever we have private drives, we try to make sure that those are designed to the same overall cross-section of public streets with sidewalks and tree plots along both sides. So the petitioner has incorporated a new sidewalk along the south side for the use of this residence here, as also for the developments to the east. Then there's also another sidewalk along the east side of the property, again along that shared access drive to provide pedestrian circulation all the way around the building. And then another sidewalk on the south side of the building for pedestrian use as well. Due to some of the grade change and trying to get ADA access into the commercial site, there's a pretty substantial ramp system that's shown along the southwest side of the building and the site in order to provide ADA access to that commercial space. But there's also a more direct connection in front of that space on the west side with a staircase as well. So the grading plan does include some stormwater detention ponds, some catch basins running along the north side of the building. These kind of work in a series of kind of cascading small ponds to capture rainwater both from the building and the site, as well as some of the drainage to the east of this. Those will be planted with a stormwater mix to provide some stormwater quality improvements before those ultimately connect to the stormwater drains that move into the Miller Showers Park to the west. So the petitioner has submitted a landscape plan for this that meets all of the zoning code requirements for quantity and species. There's some slight modifications to the quantity shown in the landscape plan to appropriately show each quantity for each species, but that's certainly just something that will be reconciled with the grading plan, but we have not identified any issues with making that small change to just a landscaping planting list for the grading permit. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of grade change along the site, and the building has been designed with some staggered floors. So they've included a cross-section in the plan, which is also on the screen now. So it's an 8-story building. One of the stories is completely below grade. They've got parking on 4 of those stories, which you can see here kind of in the gray area on this cross-section. So the staggered kind of moves as you move east along the site, but it still maintains the 8 stories along each of the sections of the building, which meets the minimum height or the maximum height and the maximum stories that are allowed. The utilization of the affordable and sustainable development incentives allows for an additional 2 stories and 12 feet for each story. So that's where you're seeing these cross sections that take advantage of that utilization or the incentive offered by the UDO. The utilization of those incentives also gives them an allowance or no restriction actually on the floor plate of the building. So the granting of those incentives do allow for the additional floors and the additional or no restriction for the floor plate for the building. So I'll just kind of briefly step through each of the levels. As I mentioned, each level does have parking within the building. So this is a lower level. This would be completely below grade. There is some storage lockers here, and bike parking are located on some of each of the levels. This is lower level 2, so this is going to be the side that really is the ground level. So this is going to be the level that you see from the street. They've got the commercial space in the southwest corner of the building, further amenity space to the north of that, again along the front. Some residential units on the north side, some storage, and the majority of this floor will be used for parking, but it all is all contained completely within the building. Again, the next level above that, you've got some residential units, some more parking within the building. And then as you move up, the upper levels are all completely residential units in nature, with an upper floor pool area and kind of amenity roof. So with this, of course, the petitioner has submitted various elevations for all 4 sides of the building, showing compliance with the zoning code and building materials. The building overall has a masonry base with different levels of cementous panels above that to meet some diversity and patterns and change in color as you move around the building. This is the north side of the building, so this would be the side of the building facing that shared access drive. On the left side of the screen, you can see one of the pedestrian entries, and then on the right side, you can see the commercial space with all the glass that surrounds it, and that's actually the amenity space So this south elevation shows you that commercial space on the left side, as well as the stairs and the entry on that side. So again, they've got the breakup of materials, the masonry kind of base. They've got some more masonry columns on the southwest side of the building. And then the west side of the building on the right side of the screen would be the side facing walnut. So you can see the heavy presence of glass, the retaining walls that have been landscaped, and then the two pedestrian entries on the left and right side of the building, the north and the south side of the building. And then the left side of the screen, this would be the east elevation, so that would be facing the other shared access drive where they have an office space. So again, a heavy glass presence, and then the kind of opening there would be how residents would get into the parking garage. So the entrance to the parking garage is facing, away from Walnut Street, away from the shared access drive. So they've done a good job of directing the sides facing the most heavily visible and usable portions of the site just with residential units, and directed all the vehicular access to the back of the unit. So again, within their packet, and just kind of briefly stepping through some of this, they've shown how each of the 40-foot modules meets our various architectural requirements. So just kind of to reiterate, each section of the building cannot have a module more than 40 feet in width without including 3 out of the 4 elements that are outlined in the zoning code, which require either projections that are 3% of the building width, change in building height of 5 feet, 50% glass, or incorporation of awnings or canopies. So they stepped through each of the elevations and showing which of those elements that they've met. The building has a lot of projections within the kind of interior courtyards that have been shown. So that's how they've met that. They've got the change in the building height as you move across there. And then they've either incorporated awnings or the 50% glass. Most of the situations, they have awnings present along all of the modules just to provide a consistent view and design across the building as a whole. So these are the east and west elevations. So the right side would be the side facing Walnut Street. Again, stepping through each of those modules and showing how they've met each of the separate architectural requirements for the building as a whole. They've also included 2 renderings. So this would be the south or the northwest corner of the building. So Walnut Street is on the right side of the screen here. The shared access drive is on kind of the left side. It appears that there's shared parking here, but there is not a plan for shared parking on that access drive. So this is mostly just kind of an illustrative version of what is being shown for the building as it looks, as you would see it from 2 different perspectives. They've also included a northeast rendering. So this would be kind of what you would see from the inside. So the shared access drive is on the right side of your screen here, and the vehicular entrance into the building is on the left side. So with that, we do find that this meets all of the requirements of the UDO. As I mentioned, they are requesting to utilize both the affordable housing and the sustainable development incentives. In order to meet the sustainable development incentives, they will be committing to designing this to a silver certification from the National Green Building Council. And then the affordable housing component, they are utilizing the payment in lieu option, which requires a certain percentage contribution based on the number of bedrooms. So they've outlined that number specifically in their petitioner statement. So it does meet the requirements for those incentives, and so we are recommending that the Planning Commission allow and approve the use of the affordable housing and sustainable development incentives with this petition, with the 7 conditions that are listed in staff's report. And then there's an 8th condition that was listed here on screen that was just recently brought up by a question from staff regarding the construction of a sidewalk across that shared access drive. There currently is not a sidewalk across that access drive, but given that the entire drive will be tore up and rebuilt, this certainly seems appropriate to be able to incorporate an ADA compliant sidewalk across that drive. So we've added an 8th condition just to address that specific situation there. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Is there a representative of the petitioner who'd like to make a presentation tonight?
Good evening. My name is Nathan Castillo. I'm the architect from GLR Group. We'll give you a very quick presentation just to kind of further emphasize our design and some of our ideas behind the project. But first, I'm going to hand it over to our client who is on the Zoom to give a brief introduction to core spaces and how they approach their developments. Olivier, you there?
Can you hear me all?
Oh, yeah, we can hear you.
Sorry about that. It was not letting me unmute. Okay, thank you, Nate. Thank you everyone. My name is Olivia Praise. I am the development manager for Core Spaces, and so I just wanted to give a little bit of background on Core Spaces as a whole as a company before Nate gets a little bit further into the design. So we have a couple slides here that we just put together in regards to us at Core and who we are. The first slide just kind of highlighting some of the awards and accolades that we've received over the years. We are a vertically integrated student housing developer that has been around for 13 years. As you can see, we've gotten many awards and accolades over the years because we do have a lot of pride in our projects. And we've developed 28 assets and renovated 7 of them. And we do manage most of our properties at this time and plan to manage this one as well. This next slide shows a little bit of a timeline of us of where we started 13 years ago in 2010 with our founders, and over the years how we have had these milestones along the way, including some of our JV partners, investments, recapitalizations that have led to us growing and delivering more and more projects every year. This slide here shows what markets we're at throughout the country. Obviously, you can see a heavy interest in the Midwest, which is why we do love to do a lot of work around us. We are based in Chicago. And we do have a lot of hub projects, which this actually will be a hub project here in Bloomington. So just to show that we love to work with a lot of municipalities, and I'm happy to be presenting to you here on this. Next slide, please. This just shows a couple of our brands. As I mentioned, this will be a hub, which we consider our flagship brand, kind of what we started everything off on and having it be best in class in the student housing project. As Eric had mentioned, we do own the property next door. That is a state project because it was a value add development. And we're proud to be owners of that one and connect these 2 properties. And then lastly, just an overall presentation here, just kind of showing how we're fully integrated all the way to our core, how we have separate entities within our company going from research, due diligence, acquisitions, entitlements, but it all leads us to making sure that we have the best projects at the end of the day. So I'll give it back to Nate to talk through our project a little bit more.
Okay, thanks, Olivia. Yeah, so we've been working with Eric very closely to dial this project in to meet all the design guidelines and meet all the requirements of the UDO. He did show some renderings already, and we'll go through those again and then show some added renderings that we've provided this week. Overall, site plan, we already stepped through that a little bit, but some precedents here for the site, really looking at native landscapes, really paying homage to the limestone and Indiana limestone in particular for the region. So giving it a lot of character and really enhancing that pedestrian experience. You can go to the next slide. So to touch on some of the drivers for the project, just from a conceptual level, we really looked at limestone being a driver in sort of the locale. The area in general has a lot of limestone, and on campus is very prevalent. And then having the industry of Indiana limestone in the region, so really drawing on that to drive some of these ideas. We mentioned the terrace or the stepping of the project, so we're dealt with some very tough site conditions with the elevation change, and then also the bedrock below it. So with the bedrock being a challenge, we sort of embraced that and brought that into the base of the project to kind of pulling this idea of a quarry kind of being carved out and stepping with the grade. So bringing in that like highly textural stone material at the base. This goes into just some context of the project. You can see the verve. We got 2 aerials there that show the scale adjacency of our project. So while we're similar in height to the project, we're very, very much smaller in footprint compared to the verve to the south there. And then just going through some of these additional renderings. Yeah, you can step forward. One more. This is the northwest corner. So we are elevated quite a bit from the Walnut Street there. So we do have some terracing of grade with some retaining walls that really trying to bring in some of those native plants at the corner to make it feel a little more lush and approachable. And then we already saw this rendering as well. So at the northeast corner, this is where the main lobby is for the residents. And we are providing a full amenity floor where you can see the glazing kind of extending beyond there to the right. So they're really trying to activate that access road and bring a lot of transparency and life to the public-facing facades, as we mentioned. And then also, providing some landscaping and street trees to really make that a very walkable and enticing kind of experience along the facade. This spins around to the southwest corner, so you can sort of see the Verve there on the right, just in terms of scale. We're very comparable. Some of the elements that we kind of skipped over a little bit was some of these vertical elements where we got a lot of separation, a lot of setbacks that is kind of pulling on these ideas of kind of rock formations being kind of carved in and out of the project. But in this particular view, we do see the commercial space there at the corner. We do have ADA ramping up to that space, and then we are working with sort of our stair design at the moment to get that to work with the grade change there. And then this spins around to see the least visible side a little bit more on the south. So we do have that pedestrian sidewalk along the south, glazing there for some bike room elements on the corner. But then also we are bringing around trees and landscaping there. So, really pulling on these ideas of native plants and grasses within the area. And then this is just a zoomed in shot near that northeast corner lobby space, just to kind of get a little more kind of entrenched in the experience along that sidewalk to kind of experience the street trees and the plantings along that walkway. And with that, I'll open that up to questions or comments from the commissioners.
Thank you. Are there questions from commissioners either for staff or for the petitioner? Commissioner Cochran?
Eric, I know we've talked a lot about the, in discussion on the retail. Can you explain, they've got 1,500 square feet of retail, and just out of curiosity, how does that fit in? Was that a choice of the developer, or is that a code requirement that we have?
It is not a requirement. That is something that they incorporated. Obviously we encourage that. There's, when you have 400, 500 people living in one location there, having some on-site retail, benefits them, but it's not a requirement.
Okay. And then for the developer, the retail space, as far as parking for that and access to that, is it within, can you just kind of explain, is it in the garage for the retail space?
We could provide designated retail space, parking spaces. We are over parked by code right now, so we have that flexibility to incorporate that.
Okay. Okay, great, thanks.
Any other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Kinsey.
All right, thank you for the design elements. It looks really cool. So I want to ask a little bit more, though, about some of the sidewalk spaces. Is there a sidewalk on the shared access?
Yes.
route?
We have sidewalks on all four sides currently.
Okay. All right, and how far does that sidewalk, where does the sidewalk end in the shared access? Does it go all the way? Yeah, I don't see any, there's nothing in here in the packet, I don't think, that goes that far. Maybe that.
In terms of beyond the property line?
Yeah.
Where does it connect to?
Yeah, does it connect to anything?
That's a good question. The owner does own the property to the east, and there's some synergies with that property where we've located the lobby space, so that is sort of adjacent to their leasing space and the fitness center over there. So there's a little bit of connectivity there, and then we do have the bus stop just to the south of our property. So we envision a lot of people passing through this site, both on the north and south, to get to those public transit spots.
Yeah, so I guess I'm thinking about, north and south, yes, but also then Where does it go?
East and west,
Yeah,
sorry.
east and west,
I got
yeah.
my directions
Yeah.
mixed.
Okay.
Yeah, so coming from the east to the west.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if, Eric, you have anything from staff's perspective on that. Is it sufficient, what it connects to or where it goes?
Well, so, on this particular site, they've got their sidewalk wrapped on all four sides of the property. It's stubbing to adjacent properties. So, on this site itself, it's very sufficient.
Okay.
We are just looking at this, with this being a site plan approval, it's not really a discretionary one. We look at the box that they own and they're proposing, and does that box meet? Obviously we want to try to line it up with adjacent things if possible, and as the petitioner mentioned, and as you can see right here on the screen, there are some adjacent sidewalks on the immediate properties that they own that these will kind of help connect to.
Great.
But on the site that they have and they're developing, they're providing very excellent pedestrian facilities, I would say.
Okay, that's great. And then the other question I have is about, just to clarify, the parking. Is all of the parking below the building? Is that, tell me more about parking areas.
Yes, so we do come in, this is a good section right here. So on the right side, that's the east side of the property, so that's where we would come in. So that first, we're calling it level 1, is parked with either amenity or residential wrapping around it, and then we'd be ramping down, and that ramp system and the parking steps with the bedrock essentially, so we're challenged with the excavation and cost for removal of that rock. So we're trying to be as diligent as possible to get that parking to step with the bedrock. So that's why you see a little bit of that stepping of the gray areas there.
Yeah, but it's all below building.
Yes,
Okay.
it's all below building.
Okay.
The only facade that parking will be visible is on the south, and then on the insets on the north, which are kind of tucked back from the road, so to speak.
Okay. All right, I'm going to ask the staff confirm that what was just said. Is that true? Sorry, Eric, did I catch you off?
No, yes. So, so here's kind of the south elevation. So there's no exposed decking. They've got windows in those areas.
Yeah.
But there's no surface
We won't
parking.
see any, yeah.
And you don't really see the parking area at all from the outside, by virtue of how they've designed the building walls and the windows and the screening.
And we've designed all the window patterns to make it look seamless with the rest of the building, so there's no blatant blank walls or large openings that indicate a garage per se.
And what's the distance between the new wide sidewalk that will be put onto Walnut and the building front? I can't really get a sense of that, and I didn't.
It's about 15, so the corner of their building is right at the 15-foot setback.
Great. Okay, right at it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and then that opens up
Can't
further.
get any closer than that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And last question about silver design. What is uniquely making it silver?
I don't know, Olivia, if you want to take on the sustainable question.
Yeah, absolutely. So it'll be NGBS Silver. So it is just another sustainable program similar to LEED. The reason we chose this one is because we already had to implement a lot of these core options into our sustainability program internally. And so some of the options that we're looking at for the NGBS Silver will be including EV charging stations, we'll have some green roofs, which you could see in that site plan we showed up at the top level, reporting to the Energy Star group for 3 years post turnover to make sure that we're using our energy, using compliance with that. There's a whole checklist program that we'll be using for that, and actually we have hired a master verifier to work with us along the way, both from the design standpoint and post-construction, to make sure that we achieve the silver and then some.
Okay, but no specification of solar or anything like that at this point, or is? Not at this time. Unfortunately, due to the size of the building, it's not a large enough roof area for that to work on this one, so we're looking at some other options in lieu of that. And so we're trying to use the roof appropriately that we think makes sense with size, which is why we're looking at the green roof. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Just a quick comment and also a question. It's great to see both incentives being used. Like, I don't know, have we had other projects that have been able to utilize both routes to the extent of what they're doing with this?
I believe the apartments on West 17th Street utilize both.
They use both? Okay. So just a question, how they came to the 1.4 million based on 15% of 463 bedrooms. Is that a price per bedroom that they're?
That's actually in our administrative manual.
Okay.
Where it outlines the cost ratio that they have to move for the affordable housing component. So it's just a formula that we work. I'm sorry, that's a formula that we work with the Housing and Neighborhood Development Director, but it's outlined in our administrative manual.
Okay, great. That's, yeah, it's great to see that. It's a sizable amount, obviously. Great design, so, yeah, job well done.
Appreciate it.
Other questions for staff? Commissioner Seabour.
A question about how will residents, if they're ordering something from Amazon or Grubhub or from their pizza delivery guy or the mail, how will that kind of traffic and activity be accommodated?
That's a great question, and I think we have a loading zone on the site plan. If we could maybe flip back to that, I think we had an area noted there on the right side. This being the main lobby at the northeast corner, we would anticipate all the drop-offs and loading to come around on the access road and have a little spot there to wait, so to speak.
Okay, and that's a shared access drive between adjacent properties, and will be managed by those?
Yeah, by the owner, yes.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any additional questions? All right. Thank you. Seeing no more questions, we will then go to public comment on SP 0923. If you're here in the chamber, step up to the podium, state your name for the record. If you're online, look for that reactions button. Click that and raise your virtual hand, and we will try to recognize you. When it is your turn to speak, you will have 5 minutes to speak. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks. My name is Greg Alexander again. I've got some opinions on this overall process of approving dense housing so far from downtown or campus. Location shouldn't become ideal for density just because it won't inspire complaints from the neighbors, because the neighborhood already looks like a highway hellscape. But I'm just here for the sidewalks, so you all wouldn't approve this site plan if there was a deficient car network. For example, if Walnut Street had a 100-foot gap in it, didn't connect, just a quarter mile south of here, you'd turn it down. You'd say our public infrastructure needs to be improved before we can support 400 bedrooms in this location. And that wouldn't kill the project. They'd just work it out. They'd fix the deficient infrastructure. They'd work with Public Works or engineering, and they'd take care of it. Well, we have exactly that, but it's the sidewalk network that's missing. There's still no continuous sidewalk on the east side of Walnut Street. It's shocking. It's a scandal. It's a failure of government. Anyone walking south from this location will meet a gap between them and the rest of the city. Just a block north of 17th Street. They have two obvious options. Either they can walk through the mud and gravel pit that is there, which is what a lot of people do, or they can cross Walnut and walk in the city park across the street. It's too bad we don't have any safe crossings of Walnut, though. I got to remind you, somebody was killed crossing Walnut at 19th Street in 2016. This is not a safe place to cross the street. It should be, though. You know, that's an achievable goal. Of course, they have a third option. They can drive, or of course, they can just stay home. They can avoid the downtown, even though they live on the exact same street as the courthouse. We cannot keep doing this. Demand that they fill in the remaining sidewalk gap on Walnut. It's between 17th and 19th. It's about 87 feet. It's nothing. Or do not allow them to build here. We simply cannot accept that. I messed it up. Thanks to previous work by the project just south of here, the gap is now very small. I am sure the developer would eagerly pay to resolve such a small gap. You just need to accept the responsibility of not allowing density where basic infrastructure is deficient to support it. As a city, we have that responsibility to our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment?
We have one on the Zoom. You should be able to unmute.
Good evening. My name is John Richards. I'm an attorney at Bungan Robertson here in Bloomington, and I represent two entities that own property adjacent to the proposed development. The first is Varsity Court, which is to the north and east of this proposed development. The second is Stadium Crossing, which is directly east of this development between the development and Dunn Street. There is an existing fence between State Apartments and Stadium Crossing. And because of the fence, residents from the Verve, which is to the south, south of this development, walk through Varsity Court and Stadium Crossing to get to the Indiana University bus stop, which is on the west side of Memorial Stadium. That's a significantly less of a walk, shorter distance, I should say, between walking along the public sidewalks south on North Walnut Street to go east on 19th Street, or north on the bypass to go west on Dunn Street. It is likely that the same will occur with respect to the residents of this proposed development. With an addition of 463 bedrooms, this will likely significantly increase the amount of pedestrian traffic on the neighboring property owners, which creates issues of security and safety, which is a burden to the neighboring property owners. Similar issues were raised with what is now the Verve at the time that the same issue was before the planning department with respect to this process. The neighboring property owners do not oppose the project, but believe it's appropriate to delay the vote until the issues related to the likelihood of significant increased pedestrian traffic on the neighboring property owners is addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Any other hands raised online, Eric?
No, I don't see any.
All right, last call for public comment. Okay, we are back to the commission then for any additional questions or comments or motion. Commissioner Kinsey.
Yes, I guess I have a question about the missing sidewalk comment that Greg Alexander raised. Can we get clarification on where that is? And I'm sorry, I sort of missed it when it was being described. Eric, can you, were you following all that?
Along Walnut Street, as I recall, there is a gap for some sidewalks further south. There's a residential property here that's missing one. There is one that was installed along the east side of Walnut that connects along the north side of 19th. That was something that was worked out with the PUD approval for the Verve. So the only sidewalk connection I'm immediately thinking of, because the Hilton Garden put one in when they did one, was just a residential property that's owned just north of the Hilton Garden. That's the only one that I'm immediately aware of. I believe La Sharada has one.
I actually walk this pretty frequently in the summer, so it wasn't clear to me where that was. But I mean, I agree. It's potentially a really walkable. I mean, I live on the north side, and I'll walk up to the farmers market on this route, and it is. I thought it was now complete, but I must have walked across grass at some point here, or I crossed over to the center.
Yeah, I think there's just a little bit north of the Home to Suite Hilton. I'm sorry, that's what that is.
Okay, that's what it is. All right. Okay, but while I want to see a continuous sidewalk, is that proximate enough to where this is in order to compel some?
No, so that would not be adjacent to the petitioner's property. So that is not a requirement.
Yeah, okay. All right. Okay. And then I wonder, I do remember having all of the conversations about the lack of connectivity between I guess simplest to say, to the east. And the other comment that was made by, I think it was John Roberts, about the pass-throughs. Is there any way to resolve that, and has any attempt been made to work out? I know we've talked about this when we were working through the Verve issues, and it wasn't something that could be worked out.
Yeah, obviously it's challenging because, when we have a design petition come forward for a specific property, they are required to do things on their property to meet the UDO compliance. Off-site improvements are not required with by right approvals. So as you were commenting on, when the Verve was done, we required them to put in a sidewalk connection to the east. It did not appear to be something that the Varsity Villas owners were in favor of. They weren't in favor of continuing it through their property, but we made them put it in hopes that, Varsity Villas redevelops over time, we can get that installed. As I mentioned, the petitioner does own the property immediately east of this, but it's not part of this development petition. They do have sidewalks throughout that development somewhat, but it is a separate standalone project that is not being forced, is not required to come into compliance with what is being brought to the Planning Commission tonight. So yes, pedestrian connectivity throughout this entire area could be improved. However, each property owner is required to do that when they come forward for development on each respective property only. Unless something comes forward with a rezoning or PUD that's more discretionary, that, we can pursue some of those things, but just a by right site plan approval, somebody's only required to do improvements on that specific property.
Yeah, I don't know if the petitioner has any comment about this, but, it strikes me as a real missed opportunity. It's a shame not to have an accessible route so that students can walk from this space. And I don't know if you've had any thoughts about this at all.
I can speak to this a little bit. Actually, our property directly adjacent to the east does have a sidewalk connection that goes through the center of it that is fairly close to where our property sidewalk would end. So there is connectivity across the way. I can't speak to the other properties around it, but there are plenty of sidewalks that are accessible that you could pass through from our adjacent property to this one.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, we're looking at within our property line and doing the best we can to connect to the adjacent properties. So we're doing everything by the UDO within our property line.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
All right, any additional questions or comments? How about a motion? I'll just read the staff recommendation again. The recommendation is that the Planning and Transportation Department recommends that the Plan Commission approve the use of the Sustainable Development and Affordable Housing Incentives and adopt the proposed findings and approve SP 0923 with 7 conditions as listed in the packet and also on the screen right now. And I'm sorry, yes, and an 8th condition that has been added to address that an ADA compliant sidewalk is required across the shared access drive. Do we have a motion?
I'll move to approve.
So you're moving that we approve just according to the staff recommendation as written? Yes. All right. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. Any final comments before we call the roll? Let's call the roll.
Ballard? Yes. Burrell?
Yes.
Seaborn?
Yes.
Cochran?
Yes.
Kinsey?
Yes.
Ko-Rodke?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
St. John?
Yes.
Whistler?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
All right. Thank you. We are on to our final petition of the evening. This is case number ZO12-23. And I believe we have Jackie again to present.
Jackie Scanlon, Development Services Manager. We are looking at tonight text amendment. And we saw this last month. So we had our regular annual UDO update text amendment that we brought to you in March of this year. And one of the things that you removed was a text amendment related to maximum parking standards that we were proposing to add to those uses that didn't currently have maximum parking standards. So we met with a small group of Plan Commission members who had expressed interest, as well as met internally and looked at those numbers again. We proposed a couple of changes, a few changes, so we'll just go over the proposal again tonight, and then we can try to answer any questions you have. Additionally, the council is bringing forward changes to the chicken flock regulations in Title VII, and Title 20 references those. So there is one text amendment related to chicken flocks because the current use-specific standard talks about a chicken flock, and they are going to propose to allow multiple chicken flocks. So that has been changed to chicken flocks plural. So that is part of this amendment as well. So as you will recall, we have a table in the UDO, table 04-10, and it lists all of our uses from the use table and assigns maximum parking standards to those uses. So we have 47 uses in that table that have limits currently, and then we are proposing changes to the 68 other uses that either don't have a limit at all, 58 of them don't have any limit, and then 10 we're proposing to make some changes to additionally. So one of the things we talked about when we met last time was kind of why would we need parking maximums? So for a few reasons. One is obviously for consistency for petitioners. It is odd that almost half of our uses have maximums and the other half don't. We went back to look through the paperwork for the process that we did with the consultant when we updated the code in 2019 and 2020. And when we looked at the 2019 UDO, a number of the uses that are now listed as no limit had person-based limits at that time, which is a hard standard to regulate. So for example, vehicle impound storage was listed as one space per employee on largest shift. So we had a number of uses like that in the old code. So it seems that the consultant, as a way to address that, changed a number of those to no limit. And so we are proposing to change those basically to site-based requirements, as our other uses are. For example, a certain number of spaces per square footage of use of the building. So we think that will be helpful from a use standpoint if they are all regulated in a similar way. Also from an administration standpoint for staff as well. Additionally, our policy guidelines in the comprehensive plan do call out in a couple of places that we put in the staff report that the comprehensive plan does want us to minimize area of land dedicated to parking. So storage of vehicles, and in this case, the code uses that you see are mostly temporary storage of vehicles, right? So it's not long-term land designated for vehicular uses. It in a more permanent fashion, but for temporary uses while you're utilizing that business. So something that's not full all the time. So in a couple of places here, we noted both in the downtown and in the urban corridor design guidelines, indicating that trying to identify strategies where we'll be lessening large open asphalt spaces is important and something that we're wanting to do. So we're trying to address that as well. We had a member of the public come and who had a couple questions about a couple of the specific uses. So we put in some information. We presented a little bit of it last time, but for example, jail. So one thing, that we want to make clear is we're not trying to regulate out the use of vehicles. Obviously, the community is still heavily reliant on vehicles. I think almost everyone here probably used one to get here this evening. We realize that uses need parking. We are just trying to make sure that parking is in relatable scale to the use that's going on in the building. So looking at the uses that are already regulated or looking at uses that we're proposing to regulate in how they're addressed in other communities is something that we've done, as well as looking at guidance from our professional planning organization. So trying to not only internally compare, but compare with similar communities in Indiana, also communities in Indiana that aren't similar, but do have maximums, aren't similar, I would say, ideologically, but do have maximums. And as well as communities that have the types of uses that we might currently do not have regulations for right now. So those types of things are included. For example, the jail comparison here for how many spaces that they actually propose on site, as well as what our regulation would allow. And then again, stadium was brought up, so some examples for those. For the more general uses that we see every day, we again tried to compare the use, what is actually going on in the building for each use, and are there similar uses already in code that could be comparable, where we're not seeing issues with the spaces that are allowed for those uses. I will say, we are of course open to changing these numbers if anyone has specific ideas. And additionally, we do track the number of variances we do for these. So I know that came up last time. Since 2020, we've had 4 parking maximum variances, and they were largely for restaurants. 4 that were, 5, and 3 were for restaurants. And so that's something we have proposed in this update to increase the allowable parking for restaurants. We've also proposed to increase the allowable parking for fitness center, because that was another that we've seen come forward describing, indicating that yes, they needed a variance, and then we looked deeper and decided to increase those numbers. So it's something that we're always open to. And we haven't had, as I said, we've had those 5 come forward. We haven't had a lot of issues with this max parking, with the max parking numbers that we do currently have in the last few years. So, just generally, we believe that adding maximums to the allowable amount of surface parking for all the uses is in line with city goals, as I mentioned, encourages green space, encourages space for people and buildings, as opposed to necessarily designating space for vehicles only, still allowing area for that, but allowing area for other things as well. I think one thing we could address that was discussed, that was brought up by Plan Commissioner, I think that this is especially important for those areas of town that we have that haven't developed yet. So for example, when we're talking about like the Fullerton site that we saw with the county, while the impervious surface coverage maximum also limits development on sites, for large sites, that's not going to be an issue. For example, at the Fullerton site, they were only going to be able to develop at all 30% of that site. And if they were to choose a use that didn't have a parking maximum, then they would be able to just basically put as much parking as they could fit, which on a site like that would be acres and acres of parking, which just doesn't seem congruous to us with the long-term goals of the community. So for example, 1 acre is around 320 parking spaces. So not a parking lot with 320 spaces, but the actual dimensions for 320 spaces. So, when we see these uses that we think may end up needing a lot of parking, they may need to think about a model of shared parking or structured parking to be able to get to be able to utilize the land that they have in a more efficient way, as opposed to, they need 600 parking spaces because they're building a new stadium of some kind. Oh, we're going to do that on 4 acres or whatever that may be. That's something that we're trying to avoid, those outliers. And I think that the numbers that we have proposed are reasonable enough that is what we'll be catching as outliers. If we're wrong and some numbers for the specific ones do come forward to the Board of Zoning Appeals, that's something that we're happy to address in our yearly update to change those items. And some, we do want it to be right. We're trying to strike a balance between the goals for economic viability and the environment, and making this as much of a pedestrian-friendly community as possible. And those things, it's not always super clear how to do that, but we think this policy moves toward that, and we are still open, of course, to amending it if need be. So we ask that you forward the petition that we submitted to you in the packet related to chicken flock and maximum parking update to the Common Council with a positive recommendation. I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Jackie. Are there any questions from commissioners? No questions. You do have one?
All right, I have one question. Okay, just to be consistent in the use of the S in chicken flocks, does it need to be added to the accessory use table too? Does the S need to be added? I appreciate that the chicken flocks don't need additional parking. But
no,
but I don't know
because you could still have one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I think this is really interesting. I appreciate what you're trying to accomplish with the maximum, and to be consistent throughout. I think it's really great. And the other part that I really appreciate is that you've already demonstrated your capacity and willingness to make changes to restaurants and fitness after having seen what was necessary. So I really appreciate that.
Commissioner Cochran.
So, Ms. Scanlon or Jackie, we spoke briefly earlier. Can you describe, with the change in use, there's the limited compliance. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of explain that a little bit? I guess the challenge that I'm having, and we've talked about this, is it's just for removing parking and what some people would consider an asset, just the cost burden that it can put on a property owner or a future tenant to come in and, say, remove 10 parking spaces. I completely see the point, but it's making it very challenging on properties that have been vacant to put them into use.
Sure.
So we'd like to have a little bit more conversation.
Sure. I'm just going to show a little example, and then I'll probably let Eric describe it because he does it better than I do. But this is an example we brought up last time, and I couldn't think of the address, so we didn't look at it. But this is out on Profile Parkway. It's the old Upland location. The maximum impervious surface coverage here is 70%. This is over that. And if a use goes in here that doesn't have a maximum parking limit, then none of this gets updated. So is that a benefit to the person moving in? Yes, because they don't have to take up this parking. But to the community who is looking for sites in this location to have some green, and some parking lot infrastructure to deal with the runoff that's happening on site, those types of things we get from limited compliance. And we can't compel a site like this to do those updates if there's no maximum parking, because under limited compliance, you have to meet the parking standards. One of those is maximum, and you only have to meet the impervious if you're over maximum parking. So it's the trigger for both things. So this is what I was kind of talking about, the balance, and I've had this conversation with other commissioners as well, where one easy thing to say is like, well, let's just do impervious surface then in limited compliance. But we kind of see that as like the extreme, that's the environmental end. It's like, yes, let's tell anyone who goes in here that they have to rip this up and meet 70%. And then the other end, is not having them do anything by not having a max parking, and that's the more business-friendly, arguably end. And so the way that the regulations are written now is the middle, right? So we're trying to ride that line between the two competing interests by saying, yes, anyone who goes in here you don't have to rip out so much of this, because getting this to 70% would be substantial, but you have to get as close as you can if you're over the amount of parking we would let you have if you had just built this. And so it's kind of confusing, and it's a little wonky, and it's not super fun to explain to people. And we are often in an awkward position because realtors don't always understand it, and they don't explain, so then they're telling someone that they can move in here, and then when they call us and say, oh, we're ready to do it, and we're like, oh, well, great, you have to take out 10 spaces, that creates issues. So I think it's an education piece on something for us to be more active in educating those in the community who have that direct contact with potential users. But this is an example of why it's important to have those in a limited compliance situation. So in a limited compliance situation, we can have you bump down to your maximum parking number, but we can only compel you to get closer to your impervious surface or parking setbacks if you're over that number to begin with. So did I explain that properly?
So, Chris, I'll just say, every government agency, whether it's the building department, the fire department, the planning department, we all have our set of rules and regulations, and there are tons of things that were built prior to those regulations that are allowed to continue and exist, they're grandfathered, but you're always going to have some threshold that you cross that you've got to bring a property into compliance. Maybe you've got to put in a sprinkler system, you've got to put in your fire exits, you've got to put in landscaping. So the limited compliance standards are, that's what we have written, and this has been painstakingly done over a long time, because these conversations are very difficult. When you tell somebody you've got to remove this, or you've got to plant this, or you've got to build a sidewalk, if we don't make something a law, no one's going to do it. We can suggest things, but I just don't have the money to do that. Well, the conversation just stops right there. So you have to make it a law, and you have to make it clear-cut and predictable and fair. When you say, oh, the people across the street had to do the same thing, that makes it easier to swallow. I'm not being singled out. You can sit here and point to numerous situations, and here are the standards, and we try to make them as clear as possible so that it's not subjective, it's not, a hard conversation, it's, predictable.
Well, I appreciate giving the numbers on how many variants have been requested, which seems like a very low number, obviously. The thing that I'm fearful of is non-disclosure, people just moving forward and just kind of, obviously my method. I call you guys, on my speed dial on about every property. But I just don't want to create that atmosphere either, so. All right, well, no, thank you for that. So.
I want to just follow up on that. Looking at the property that you just showed up there, in some properties it's pretty clear, right, what's parking and what's other impervious surface. Now I can deduce that on the right side of the screen that's parking because there's white stripes on it. But how do what determines all that other impervious surface in the back is or is not parking?
No, that's a great question, and that's something that that's our starting point. So we say, here's your maximum parking number. Show me where those spaces are going. Show us, in this situation here where it looks like there's just asphalt every which direction and who knows what's being used. Delineate your parking spaces. Show us your maximum number of spaces, and then we'll work with you. If there are areas, hey, this is just not being used, you're over impervious surface, you've got to take it out. So there's a little bit of give and take, but it starts with the site plan that they give us based on that raw parking maximum number.
So are there scenarios where you go in and say, looks like there's a change of use taking place, and you say, well, it looks like you're exceeding your parking maximum, and the property owner says, nope, that's not parking, that's storage. That's not parking, that's a turnaround area. And instead of tearing up that, I'm just removing the stripes and repurposing it for something else.
So that's a tough one, and that's a case-by-case kind of basis, and we work with them. If there's areas that we can clean up a little bit and still allow them to use the site in an efficient manner, get their number of parking spaces in there. But if we can clean it up, then the code helps guide us to that, to say, you have to take up some of the spaces, some of this impervious surface, some of this gravel. If it is outdoor storage, is it legitimately approved as that? Is it storage space, or is it just gravel that's kind of spread over time and should never really have been there to begin with?
What I'm hearing you say is that it's not cut and dry that you got to tear up concrete in every case, or tear up asphalt in every case.
There's a little bit of wiggle room, a little bit to work with property owners, for what they need, but it helps to have some definitive standards, and the max parking number is the biggest thing to start with. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner St. John.
So I have 3 questions. One, why did we not have limits last time? I can't remember. Why did we pass this and some didn't have limits? I understand the trying to get everyone to have a limit. That makes sense if we're going to have limits, but why did we do that to begin with?
I think Clarion is something that they do, and we went back and looked at the different staff drafts where they still had the footnotes in. I don't know if anyone else is remembering how this was, but then they would put why they were making a change. So for these, for those that they changed, mostly the footnote said, use is typically self-limiting, and which is fine, and that was something that they had suggested to us that they had used in other places, and so I think we just kind of went along with it and maybe shouldn't. The other thing is the uses, again, like I mentioned, they identified were mostly the people-based uses from the 2019 code. So it was like getting away from that was a good idea, but we maybe should have pushed to say, like, we do want to propose limits here. And I think, almost immediately, at least like Mr. Volan on council was like, what are we doing this? But, as part of a omnibus change, it has not come forward kind of till now.
Thank you. And then
is that, sorry, Mr. Grulich.
So Karin, so real quick, the no limit, it works great when you're starting from scratch and somebody is building a property that meets requirements. You've got parking in the back, you meet your minimum landscaped area. Then it regulates itself. It's the situations where we deal with these limited compliance, and we have to start with, you've got a situation like what's on the screen, or, something even worse, think of the mall, where you've got a building all the way in the back and it's just a sea of asphalt between that and the street. We have to have some number to start with to say, here's your max parking number, you've got to start taking things away. So in a new development, new construction situation, it's not an issue. The use regulates itself. You've regulated it through setbacks, minimum landscaped area, but it's the limited compliance stuff, which is what we deal with a lot, and is the hardest, that the max parking number really it's almost a starting point.
But I will say, to amend that, well, as I said in the presentation, but large lots that we still need to develop, like the one on Fullerton, we need them for those, because those things that Eric mentions, or that we've talked about as a group, impervious surface coverage, setbacks, and those things, the parcel is so big that won't matter. They'll meet those things. If the rezone had gone through and they had built a jail property there, it literally would have been acres of parking, which is maybe appropriate. That would be something for, to decide, but we do think that there needs to be some sort of limit on that type of design. And again, this is for surface parking, so if parking garage is an approved use wherever this, hypothetical development is happening, that can happen, and then that is only limited by the design requirements of a parking garage.
Okay, thank you. I do share some of the concerns of Commissioner Cochran and Commissioner Whistler, but I'm glad to hear that you do work with property owners in your response to Commissioner Whistler, so that's promising. So given that, just looking at some of these specifically, I just had a couple questions. I was curious why a meeting, banquet, event facility had 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet and a convention center has 2. They seem similar to me.
That's a good question. I think, okay, so a couple things. we're happy to change, and we're happy to take any proposals to change these. I think the idea is, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, that at a convention center conference, you're usually paired with other uses. So it's usually like convention center, restaurant, hotel, that it would be that all of those uses kind of like add up and end up being kind of ancillary for each other. So you do get enough parking, and also they typically have parking garages that are separate. So because this is the regulation only for the surface parking, usually in a convention center situation, that would be more than one use together, and then also probably have structured parking as supportive. So I think that's why it's separate, where like a meeting or banquet or event facility that's just on its own and that's all it is, needs more leeway because they're not having that shared parking with the other uses that typically pair with a convention center. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah. And then my last question, again, just looking at the details, I was looking at which ones had more per 1,000 square feet. So like a medical clinic has 5, and a grocery store has 5, and a sexually oriented business has 5. But a bar has, well, a bar would be different. In indoor, all other indoor recreation has 4. And so why does a sexually oriented business have 5? Again, no judgment on that kind of business. It's just, I was looking at ones that had the most, and I get a grocery store and a medical clinic, but I don't understand why that has 5. And yeah, the grocery store has 5.
That's a good question. Okay, so some of these, like for example, grocery store, like we did not look to lower any. So those that already existed, we were not planning to like right size any numbers, just as part of the conversation of being concerned about parking.
Okay, gotcha. So those seem odd to me, but since you're not right sizing, I see why you didn't change it.
Does that answer all your questions?
It does.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions from commissioners? All right. Is there any public comment on ZO-12-23? Don't see any here in the chambers. Is there any online? If you're online and you'd like to make comment, click on that reactions button, click the raise hand button, and we will recognize you.
No raised hands.
Last call for public comment. All right, we are back to the commission for any additional questions, comments, discussion, or a motion.
I'll motion. All right, motion to amend UDO ZO12-23 chicken flocks and table 4-10 and the maximum parking, and waive the second hearing and forward to the city council with a positive recommendation.
All right, the motion is that we approve the proposed amendments and forward to the city council with a positive recommendation and a waiver of the second hearing. Is there a second?
Second.
Any final comments or discussion before we call the roll? I'll just make one comment, which is to say I still don't love parking maximums, but I'm more convinced now than before. I think I appreciate your explanation. I was leaning towards trying to push for just an impervious surface, but I do see how that actually would be potentially more onerous on property owners. And I think it seems like the numbers in here are have kind of erred on the high side, and I think they seem pretty reasonable. I was very much on the fence, but I think I'm willing to support this tonight.
I'll just say one other thing, too. I really appreciate the time the staff took to figure this out, the consultative process you took, and the fact that you worked with commissioners here to do it. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, second that. Commissioner Cochran.
Yeah, it's, I struggle with the parking issue, obviously, because I'm on the front lines dealing with property owners every day and also tenants wanting to get into buildings, and I know the challenges behind it. But I do appreciate you're responding to our comments and the separate meetings, so knowing that there's some leeway or some discussion that can be had, I was leaning towards just saying no, but I will support it, knowing that there's conversation and we're dealing with reasonable people. So, no, thank you for that. So,
Mr. Whistler, if I can add something, I just never remember to say this when we talk about this, but there is a provision in the code that allows for a petitioner to basically prove through a parking study that they need more parking outside of the variance process that Director Robinson can approve. And that's not something we've seen people really take a lot of advantage of, but that is something that was put in with the update to allow for more flexibility without having to, wait to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals or whatever for the obvious cases. So
Yes,
thank you. Sorry about
Thank you
that.
for pointing that out. I think that's important for all of our viewers to understand, but it is definitely an important point. Thank you. Any other comments? All right, let's call the roll.
Cockrum,
yes.
Kinsey,
Yes.
Korodke,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
St. John,
Yes.
Whistler,
Yes.
Ballard,
Yes.
Burrell,
Yes.
Seabour.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
All right, motion carries, and that is our final petition for the evening. Thank you all for your patience. We are adjourned. We'll see you in May.